Right, so Tom,
Thanks for having
welcome
me on.
to the podcast, and nice to have you here, sir. My pleasure, my pleasure. And we're just talking, obviously, catching up off camera, and getting to what we want to sort of get into a little bit in this episode. So, for those obviously that don't know you, and haven't heard of you before, do you want to sort of just give them a fill in of who you are and where you come from and what your responsibility is in terms
Yeah,
of
of course.
reform and
Tom Pickup, Reform
whatnot?
UK politician. I'm a county councillor at Lancashire County Council and lead for finance and resources. Um, Beyond that, sort of have a bit of a free role, getting involved in all sorts of stuff at the council, as many of the other councillors do. Um, Happy to talk about anything. As we were just saying, nothing off the table.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I saw one of your clips on social media the other day where there was a little bit of a snide comment regarding the flags that I found quite funny, and your flippant response was exactly how I would have responded as well. Because there's, in terms of like politics, and this is one sort of big thing from my perspective. It's so polarizing at the minute, especially in this country, and you're either a right, in essence, a right wing racist fascist bigot, or you're a left wing liberal, uh, trans supporting LGBTQ sort of loving person. And the reality is most people in Britain, and I'd say a good 90% of people in Britain, are generally somewhere centralist in the middle, and they're neither left or right. But at the minute, it seems at the higher levels, especially to me, that the polarization is sort of dragging people from central to, well, no, you're going to have to come over this way because you don't want that. And it's that's where the biggest divide for me in politics is coming from, is from the top down rather than from the people up, if that makes
I
sense.
think it's
Would you
more
agree?
media led and the nature of
Hmm.
social media, which political parties and politicians then fall into, because there's certain topics where if you focus on people's differences on those topics, like immigration, um, policies relating to trans people, it's very easy to twist what somebody thinks is a good policy into an extreme. For example, with immigration, if you say there are problems with immigration, I'd like to really reduce it. I think certain people should be deported. It's easy to twist that into the realms of racist bigotry, as gets claimed. It's easy to twist
Yep.
somebody who says, I think somebody who's transitioned from one gender to another and identifies as a woman when they were born as a man should be treated with respect and allowed to go in a women's bathroom, and shouldn't be treated like they're a criminal.
Yeah.
It's easy to twist that into um, that person's really dangerous for having that view and that they're really extreme. And usually they're
Yeah.
quite contentious issues
And I
which
think,
are sensitive to people, and the media know if they focus on them, they can twist the knife on them.
well, it's the clickbait, isn't it? It's sort of that shock, the shock sort of shock value, which gets some viewers, gets some clicks throughs, and gets some sort of millions and millions of views on social media, and they become the number one news outlet. And as much as when GB News started, obviously it's one of the most recent ones to sort of start in the space. I thought, oh, they started off really, really well, and then it's gone they've kind of got dragged into the quagmire of he said, she said, entertainment rather than reporting fact and reporting. That's in my opinion. I still think they're the best of the bunch, to be honest. Best of the bunch, to be honest, especially when it comes to organisations like the BBC.
I'll tell you the truth, I
Um,
don't watch it. I
that
only watch GB News when
Go on.
somebody I know's
Do you
on
not?
it. I,
Just
yeah,
just
well,
to see
just
how
to
long
see
you
how
know
they
them.
do. If it's someone you know and they're on TV, then I watch it. But
So do you try and sort of stay out of watching? I mean, obviously, you'll see it from the inside, won't you? So you'll see at ground level and at ground zero exactly what's going on, and
well,
then
with some
beyond that,
things, with local matters,
obviously, whatever
in a
gets
general
reported.
sense, I try and read from multiple sources rather than watching. Um, TV outlets, unless it's something like there's video evidence, and I'll try and watch the underlying source material. With with
Yeah.
local matters, it's been very interesting since going into politics, seeing how different media outlets will spin things and the mechanism of how that happens.
Mm.
Um,
It must be weird. It must be really strange from your perspective. For instance, you'll see and hear firsthand what happens, and then if it gets reported on and it just gets misconstrued or twisted, like you said, it must be really strange or frustrating from your position to see that happen in real time.
I think it's just the nature of the beast. There's no point getting frustrated by it because the, you can only control what you can control with it. So it's working on how
True,
to
true.
sort of combat it and make that work for you better rather than becoming frustrated
Yeah,
by it. But it is
yeah,
very just very interesting to see because I've never been involved in something that's generated a lot of news content prior to this. So
right.
then seeing how the media
Yeah,
actually will cover it, and you'd sort of expect my view of a journalist beforehand was a lot more like they'd come in with an objective and sort of ask, let the story happen organically and sort of have a bit more of an objective view rather
yeah,
than
yeah,
it's more like they just either already have an idea of what they want to write about or that I think a lot of them are quite biased.
yeah. Well, I think that's been quite apparent, especially over well pre-COVID. It was probably not as spoken about as much, and then throughout COVID and subsequent years, I think people are seeing stories and going, "Hang on a minute, I need to have a look. I'm not just going to believe it face value. I'm going to have a look into this in a little bit of a dig because the trust kind of got broken throughout COVID, in my opinion. That's what kind of opened my eyes and a lot of people's eyes to the influence of media throughout, whether it be politics, medicine, pharmaceuticals, even sport to an extent. I mean, I'm a United fan as well as a Burnley fan, and sort of seeing the way that they attack certain managers instead of other managers that are actually doing worse than the manager that they're attacking, and it's almost that agenda. But you've seen it through, football doesn't necessarily matter in the grand scheme of things, but for things like pharmaceuticals, politics, it's a dangerous road and it's a dangerous game to play when things are twisted and things are misconstrued because like we got into it. Um, I've been sort of paying attention very closely to, and I didn't want to get into it this early, but the digital ID nonsense and the language that's used by Shabnam Mahmood for a start. There was a phrase that she mentioned. We wouldn't. It was something along the lines of, and I don't want to. So I'll pull it up just to make sure I don't butcher it. But it was something along the lines of, we're not going to use every possible use for digital ID right away because there will be mass civil disobedience. That was the precise words that she used: mass civil disobedience. Now that, for somebody that's probably like myself that's tuned in, scared the living daylights out of me. Just that phrase, because it shows me that they're not one. It's nothing to do with immigration. It's to do with obedience, and it's. I think I might have sent you a little bit of a vanity project I did, which I kind of rewrote a 3-minute excerpt of 1984 and narrated it and put it into modern day terms. It's straight out of that playbook in terms of, you obey. That's it. It's not. It's not what a government's there for. A government isn't there to rule and make the population obey. A government's there to serve, and they are the ones that are meant to obey the population. It's the opposite way around. Um, so yeah, I suppose from a media perspective, it's a difficult because it's independent. It's a difficult beast to sort of control because obviously you can become hypocritical when it's a free speech. They've got the right to say and report on whatever they want, but maybe there might be an avenue there for somebody to create an actual media organization that reports truthfully and objectively
Yeah,
without any
definitely.
agenda.
I think the editorial side of
Um,
it is, like I said, journalists earlier. I think the editorial direction is sometimes a bigger factor. It's a bit like being in any organ. It's like if you work for a
yeah,
sales company, the salesmen might all have different ideas of how they want to sell a product and what they want to say. But if the director and the sales managers of the company are pushing them in one direction, and they'd be out of a job if they do it a
you,
different way. They sort of
that's
go along
it.
with it. Yeah, so
You
people
saw
just
the
end up
line.
towing the line. So you end up getting journalists wanting to please the boss, thinking right, they just want a sensational story.
Yeah,
This will get clicks and make it look like I've done a good story. So I'll just do something anti-reform. And you compare the attention that reform have had since we came into power in different councils, and that has been the hyper focus, I think, of the media of like how can we try and get something bad.
oh, 100. Every other story at the minute is something to do with reform, and you know the age old sort of adage of there's no such thing as bad publicity, and it's true. It's going to be pushed left, right, and center, and you know, although Farage is a popularist figure like Trump in a sense in the states, he's also a polarizing figure. Um, and that might be down to the personal opinions he holds. It might be down to his previous politics with UKIP, or his affiliation with XYZ person. And you know, we were speaking off camera before in regards to the question time with Zia Yusuf and Zach Polanski and Fiona Bruce interrupting. And Zach Polanski mentioned something, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but Nigel Farage knows somebody that was prosecuted and charged with Russian collusion, this, that, the other. And all I could think at that point, as a, you know, I'm a working class lad from Lancashire, and you know, I've grafted my whole life. I don't give a rat's ass who he knows. I really don't care how. Just because he knows X amount of person and this person, it has no bearing on my life whatsoever. It's playground tactics of he said, she said. When in reality, like we've discussed as well, there's massive issues at the minute. One, immigration. Two, tax. Three, government oversight. There's all these issues, and you're talking about somebody that he may or may not know that got charged for Russian collusion or espionage. And to be fair, I thought Zia Yusuf handled it really well. But at the same time, he did come back with his own about Zach Polanski hypnotizing women before before he became a politician to think that they've got bigger boobs. Which, I mean, it is laughable to an extent when that is. I mean, and he wasn't lying. That is the truth. Um, so yeah, it is a sort of quagmire that, as a politician, and you know your aspirations, that you're going to have to navigate. I think when you get into it. But what sort of drove you into politics? Because obviously you mentioned that you're relatively new within the sort of the sphere. What sort of avenue did you go down? How did you get into it
It's
to
something
begin
that
with?
I've thought about doing for a long time, but I've always thought maybe when I'm a lot older. Um, but I had a look at the local Reform Party in Burnley because I was increasingly frustrated with what was going on in the country, and I thought I want to see what they're doing, who the candidates are, and potentially help them out. Not with a view to necessarily standing for them, but just helping in any
Mm,
capacity, whether it was in the branch or delivering leaflets or in any other sense, in a sort of organisational, financial sense, anything. Um, and then ended up being a candidate. So what I've found
right.
since in all parties, I think there's a big problem where whilst they may have support, a lot of people don't really want to get involved with a local political branch and be a candidate. So I know so many people who would be really good at different aspects of roles within councils, but then they won't want to stand forward as a candidate. I know so many people who are really passionate about reform, but they're not willing to leave the house um, and go and help. So if you ask them to deliver leaflets or something,
Yeah.
they'd be like, "Oh, I can't. I work and family and kids, and I don't have time, and that's not, you should do it for me. Like, you're the,
Yeah, yeah.
well, my vote is what you've got. And
So it's almost that put up or shut up kind of thing. If you wanted to make change, like you said, you either do something or shut up moaning
yeah,
about it
I
to an
never really
extent.
discussed it. I
Um,
had a lot of thoughts about it, but I
did you
always
not?
found it just, when I was a lot younger, I used to have like lengthy debates with people, and then I became
Yeah,
quite.
I think
Yeah,
you and me
I
both
think
on
as
that
I got
one.
older, I became a bit settled on my views and distracted by work and all the other things. And then sort of thought, right,
Yeah,
there's no point me thinking about it every time I see anything on TV or read something. And I'm becoming frustrated that I think there's a different way that you could do it. And you end up tuning out for it because it's just
yeah,
overwhelming when you're thinking, why are all these bad things happening that is so obvious?
100%. Yeah, I think that was obviously a completely different route to yourself in terms of you went down the actual political sort of route, and I went down the fact of I was seeing sort of things happen, um, whether it be through media or in my hometown, or even like wider afield, so somewhere like Manchester and stuff. And I was seeing, and um, in London, and I'm seeing things happen. And I followed the election race in the States very intently because I thought the thing is obviously what tended to happen was the UK led with whatever it did, and then the States followed. And I think that has switched probably since maybe the 60s in terms of the States now leads with decisions and with policies, and then the UK kind of sort of plays a little bit of catch up, a little bit of mirroring to see how it works. So maybe you might disagree with me on that one, but that's the way I've seen it. So I followed that very closely, and I was relieved that Trump won based on the fact that I thought if Kamala Harris won, it would be a very dangerous avenue to go down. One for the United States, two for the world, and then three ultimately for the UK, because I think that we would have followed suit very, very quickly. The reality has turned out that we've kind of gone down that road anyway, regardless of whether Trump won or not. And I think it was all thanks to conservatives having the last 5 years of absolute shit. And it was sort of, I don't think Labour won the last election. I think they sort of were handed it by default, and especially in terms of reform, they were just a little bit late to the party at that point. And they just didn't have the support that they did. So I think I went down that route of, you know, I can watch all these things and I can get frustrated and I can see these things happening and nobody's asking these questions and nobody's actually getting to the root of any issue. And it was actually something innocuous that happened under the Rishi Sunak government where they banned the XL bullies. Now, I've got a bulldog, and in essence, my English bulldog could be a dangerous dog because he's big, he's strong, and he's hefty, but it's not the dogs, it's the owners. And it really frustrated me to the point where it's like, right, how many other issues are happening where they're tackling the symptom and not the actual root cause of the problem? And I saw it more and more and more and more. And yeah, it got to the point of like I said, either put up or shut up. And this is me, in essence, putting up and trying to sort of get information out there that's no nonsense, doesn't um, doesn't beat around the bush, and stories I believe that should be heard, whether it be in politics, music, acting, sport, whatever it may be. Um, and and I commend, I admire you for that. I think it's a really, especially how old are you, if you
Yes,
don't mind me asking, Tom? Yeah,
a
I
little
don't
bit
know, say
older than
30.
that, mid 30s. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit older. Right, yeah. Well, not far. I'm 37, so I'm getting into the late part of life, or the late part of the 30s. But I think for somebody being, especially your age and what I would class as young for a politician, in that spec, it's a brave thing to do. So I commend you for that. I think and I think it's what Reform have done is they've managed to capture that youthful element big time, which is what's been lacking, which hopefully will increase voter engagement. Because it's as you know, it's been on a steady decline for decades. It's just getting less and less and less and less. I don't think it'll necessarily happen at the next general election. Personally, I think it might skyrocket for some reason. I couldn't possibly comment on why I think it will do. However, I think it's a big thing. So, in terms of um, national level politics and national level sort of issues at the minute, one of the biggest things it's on everybody's lips, and we've touched on digital ID, is the sort of immigration thing, and asylum seekers and the atrocities that have happened in Southport and elsewhere and in Manchester relatively recently. What's what have you seen at sort of local level that is not necessarily a reflection of that on a national level, but maybe gives you pause for thought, if that makes
Um,
sense? What's sort of happening at local level that you think, hang on a minute, if we don't do something here, it could snowball?
it's more apparent in East Lancashire than it is in most other places, if not anywhere in the country, because the Northwest has had more refugees and asylum seekers over the last 10 years than any other region in the UK. Of the 12 districts within Lancashire County Council's area, East Lancashire are the top four. So it's Burnley, uh, Hyndburn,
Wow.
Pendle, and Rosendale. Burnley is third for asylum dispersal at the moment, behind Glasgow and Belfast.
Right.
So you've got
Wow.
100,000
Well,
population in
and
Burnley, and we're
yeah,
behind two major cities in Scotland and Northern Ireland for where they're sending or dispersing, as they call it, asylum seekers who are the
yeah,
people who are coming here on boats or without any right to
right.
claim refugee status beforehand, and they're just turning up and saying, "I'm an asylum seeker. I want to claim asylum in your country." So whether or not you
Yeah.
call them illegal immigrants is a matter for lawyers to debate
Well, I
over, I
think.
think.
Well, I think it's a matter for media as well. Like in terms of, and I think this is the whole going back to the whole point of sort of the polarizing right and left from a media perspective, is most people. And this is sort of 90% of Reform's audience, 90% of Labour and Conservative audience. They are somewhat centralist, and they're not against immigration at all. I've got well, a lot of my friends are either first or second generation immigrants, and they are. Well, I know one of them for fact. He is so pissed off at this problem of illegal immigration because he himself had to jump through this hoop and this hoop and this hoop to actually get to this country legally. And he's probably got more of a right to be pissed off than I have, who was born here and raised here and so on and so forth, because he's actually done it the right way. He contributes to society, he pays his taxes, he's a valued member of the community, he's a top guy. But then he sees people like that are in essence illegal getting over here, and in his eyes, a free ride. And I think that's the problem when everybody and the media doesn't help. Everybody's in this country from a working class background is struggling at the minute. Especially with the cost of living being, it seems every week I go to Lidl and my meat goes up a pound. And it's the weekly shop or the bi-weekly shop that used to be 100 quid is now getting close to 200 quid. And then you see people like, I think there was a video released recently where they were flying a plane back or deporting illegal immigrants back to their home country, and they were getting a credit card of £2,000 each. And it's things like that people see, and it's the frustration that um, gets stoked by the media. Now, my issue is with illegal immigration is the fact that I don't it's not playing it down that it's not an issue and it's not a problem, and it clearly is. But I, looking between the lines, as I usually do, especially since COVID, is the fact that there, oh well, we all now know, but there must have been a reason why it's being allowed to happen. There must be a reason. There's always, politicians don't get into the power that they get into, whether that be prime minister, secretary of state, home secretary, whatever it may be. They don't get into that position if they are not intelligent and they're just a bit dumb. Like, um, save save maybe Diane Abbott. Um, but she's
She's
entertainment
put
value.
the same pair of shoes
But
on for quite a while now since that incident, so maybe she's learning.
oh, it's like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't speak ill of most people, but it's just it's hard not to see the comedy value whenever she talks. Uh, it's really funny, and the problem is that obviously if she's speaking about something serious, I won't listen because it's kind of a pointless endeavor. I don't believe anything she said. I would have to go and check it, even if I was in her party. But the obviously it did become apparent when Starmer released the sort of mandate for digital ID, and I think anybody with half a brain looked at that and thought, you know, and rightly, the media reported, we've got, uh, national insurance cards, we've got driver's licenses, we've got passports. You're not allowed to work in this country without a visa or proving that you're eligible to work in this country with a driver's license or whatever. It didn't make sense. It's illogical, like a lot of the things were through COVID. So that's when it became apparent that they were allowing this illegal immigration to spiral out of control, to push through, in my opinion, to push through this mandate for digital IDs. The elephant in the room, in my opinion, is not necessarily the asylum seekers or the illegal immigrants. It's on the other end of the spectrum where people are getting annoyed that they're costing the British public X amount of money, which they are, and I'm not hiding from the fact, but there are bigger things at play that are costing the British public a hell of a lot more. A hell of a lot more. And you're talking 20, 30 times more per month than illegal immigrants. And that brings quite neatly, and I've, it's like I've almost done this before, brings us into the Doge element, and the governmental oversight. So don't get me wrong, illegal immigration is a big issue, and it is, diversity within a society is very much important. I personally believe, and multiculturalism can work. However, with the political landscape being as it is, and with the media being as polarizing as it is, I think it becomes almost an impossibility. It's an uphill battle, whichever way you look at it, because the public don't trust politicians and don't trust the government. Therefore, anything that they try and do, they're going to push against. I mean, from your perspective, seeing it at a local level, and me, I've just found out for the first time that we're actually third on that list, which is shocking. And I don't think a lot of people in Burnley, they might have presumed that, but I don't think they
Yeah,
actually know
as in the
that
facts of it.
for a
Yeah,
fact. Yeah, and I think that's where the media are in essence are failing the British people on two levels: is the fact that they're doing the clickbait and they're not actually reporting truth of the matter, which leaves the public in a sort of limbo, which ultimately creates frustration and resentment towards anybody within
yeah.
power.
I think there's so many
I
different
mean,
angles to
would
it because you've got the issue of
mm,
immigration as a whole, which, if done correctly, should be
yeah,
an absolute asset to your country. But there's
100%.
it,
Oh,
then it's debate
100%.
over how it's done correctly. But you've got the history of it, which is a lot of people who were from what we call Commonwealth, former empire countries who had the right to come over
Yeah,
here
yeah,
because we didn't differentiate between anybody from within those countries coming back here. So whether you were born here or you were from Jamaica or any other country, for a long period, up until I think it was the 70s that stopped, you could come to Britain and you had the right to do
Hmm.
that. And the same wasn't actually true in the reverse. So a British person didn't necessarily have the right to go and live in Jamaica
True.
or South Africa, but they had the right to live here. But it wasn't until air travel became more prevalent that that presented a big issue. And then since then, you've had these waves of migration that have come from different places. You've had the Blair era, and then with the
Yeah.
asylum seekers and refugees, you've had several conflicts around the world. So you've got a general United Nations refugee scheme, which we're signed up to. So people apply via
Hmm.
the UN and they assess who they think should go where and distribute them to different countries. We've
Right.
then
Okay.
done our own for multiple. So you've got the Syrian one because of the conflict there, the Afghan one
Yeah.
because of the conflict there, and then you've had the complication with the data leak, which was all covered up by a super injunction.
Yeah.
And then you've had people from Hong Kong because of what happened there, people from Ukraine because of what happened
Yeah.
there. So you've got all these different schemes.
So basically, what you're saying is it's all
I
Tony Blair's
think
fault.
I think he's guilty of many things, and I think
I
he's
will.
made it a hell of a lot worse. And the EU was a big factor as well, and still
Yeah.
is. There's still resettlement
Hundred
schemes
percent.
going on by our Brexit agreement with the EU. So there's all these different things going
Well,
on. I
that's
think on
that's
the whole, people are just
yeah.
seeing millions of people are coming here. It's we're not building the infrastructure for it. It's a cultural melting pot
Well, we didn't have the
where
infrastructure to begin with. Yeah, we didn't have the infrastructure to begin with. So it's like, yeah, you're kind of overloading the system that's already stretched as it is for the people that are actually here, and then you're pouring more into it. Something, is going to spill over, and I think this is the problem where it starts spilling over. In terms of like people like uh, I've got my own opinions of Tony Blair, and I think um, don't get me wrong. I think when he first came to power, I was either too naive or too young to vote, but I would have voted for him because he was a very charismatic leader, very similar to Barack Obama in that sense. But then obviously you look at it on the back end, him and Gordon Brown, terrible twosome that absolutely destroyed this country financially, economically, and culturally from top to bottom. That's my personal opinion, and I'll hold that until somebody proves me wrong. And then obviously he kind of raises his head with this digital ID nonsense because it looks like his son's going to make nearly £500 million off the back of introducing this digital ID. But it's very very few media outlets reporting on that link. Um, so you heard it here first. If you haven't heard it, that's what's happening. Watch for the link between Tony Blair's son and this digital ID, because if he starts building it, he's making away with just over £400 million of taxpayers' money. Kind of like what happened through COVID as well with the Conservatives and Boris Johnson's piece on the side. But getting back on track in terms of the sort of immigration element, I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of the turmoil that we've caused in Syria, in Afghanistan, and the Middle East, um, may have probably led to almost like a national feeling of sympathy. Like, oh, well, we supported this, you know, upheaval in Syria. We supported this upheaval in Afghanistan. We should probably do something to help. But then I think the wrong people in government have taken advantage of that maybe public sentiment and caused the problem that we're kind of sort of facing at this
I
moment in
wouldn't
time.
say necessarily taking
Um,
advantage, whilst there are many instances of that. I think a lot of the time um, there becomes a sort of hysteria because when a new conflict breaks out, especially if it's somewhere that we're familiar with or is very controversial, there's all sorts of conflicts going on all over the world that kill a lot more people than,
yeah,
for example, uh, the number of people killed in Palestine and Israel with the most recent conflict. But because
yeah,
that's
yeah,
been going on since the 60s on and off, if not before, thousands of years of
yeah.
history there of people warring over that region and
Oh,
people are
well, yeah.
familiar with it.
Since,
Yeah,
since
that
the
gets a
dawn of
lot of
time.
media attention. And I think because there's Jewish and Muslim communities here who feel very passionate about it as well.
Mm.
It's that gets a lot more attention than places with a lot higher death toll. So I think wherever gets the attention, there becomes when the conflict breaks out and the media keep running with it and keep running it, becomes a bit of a hysteria that something
Yeah.
must be done. So they do something because the
Yeah.
government don't want
Yeah.
to be
No, I
seen to be
agree.
doing nothing. And they rarely, if you rush into doing
True.
things, they rarely do the right thing. So whether it's yeah,
Yeah,
whether
it's
it's
almost
intervening
reactive.
military, like America want to go over and invade X or Y country, oh, something
Uh,
must be done,
yeah.
and then you get the same with two other countries are in conflict, something must be done. People are protesting, the media are hammering us about it, so we end up doing things like recognising Palestine as a state, which is very problematic because it's not very clear which borders, which government, or anything like that. So whether you agree or
Yeah. And
disagree with it, it's not something that's been executed well, and it just presents a lot more questions.
true. I don't think it wasn't for me. It wasn't necessarily that I agreed or disagreed with that decision. I didn't understand it because it was like, it, I mean, so let's play devil's advocate in terms of say from a Jewish community, Hamas attacked and we are retaliating and blah 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 blah. From a Muslim perspective, it's a genocide. And I can see both sides of the argument. But recognizing a Palestinian state is like trying to piss on a freaking building fire to the point where it doesn't, in my opinion, actually do anything other than put you in a it puts you in like almost a political box, and this almost self sabotage, suicidal politics. That I mean, Rishi Sunak he did it up. It's up in the lead up to the election. I personally, as soon as he released his plan for national service, in my opinion, that's the nail in his coffin. He's thrown the election. It didn't make sense. And then I don't, and the same with, I mean, it's a bit different with Starbuck. He had the easiest job in the world. Any single, you could be a receptionist at a morgue, and generally you answer the phone 2 or 3 times a day. Starmer's job was easier than that. He could have gone in and sat on his hands for 5 years and done nothing and been hailed as one of the good, great prime ministers. But instead, every single decision that he's made has been the
I
been the
think to get
wrong
in
one.
power,
Uh,
I'd
you know,
say it was relatively easy in the sense that I'd refer to it as carrying a vase. All he had to do was not drop it, and he'd get in. And
not drop
Reform are in a similar position now.
it.
The lead in the polls, if you don't drop the
Yes, hundred
vase, you get
percent.
in power.
Yeah,
Actually governing, I think, is a lot more difficult, particularly if you promise things before an election, like Starmer's done
yes,
financially, they've backed themselves into a corner. And if you don't have the credibility to then explain to people why that should change and they don't trust you. And I think with
why?
Starmer, people never trusted him to start with. He just didn't drop the vase. He wasn't a popular
No,
figure with the vast majority of people.
no.
And then when he's got into power, because he's
Well,
not
I
got
think he
any of
won.
those things,
Yeah, and I think he won the Labour leadership by default because there wasn't anybody better. I mean, I think Ed Miliband was involved in that as well, and I'm thinking we've been down that route before.
yeah.
Let's not go down that route again. I would have preferred personally, and it from a Labour, I'm like I said, I'm not politically affiliated one way or another, and I can see the benefits of Conservatives, Labour, or what Labour should have been. For instance, like when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, I would have loved to have lived in Jeremy Corbyn's utopia. But I think anybody that's a realist understands that that can never be. It's just not a reality that will ever come to fruition. And I think that's why he lost. But that he was Labour values through and through. And they've kind of gone completely the opposite way. But in terms of, you know, I followed politics from that perspective. And when Ed Miliband became Labour leader, and he didn't pick his brother David, who I thought would have been a by far better leader for the Labour Party. Um, it would have, at that point, it's kind of they've come to every fork in the road and gone right when they should have gone left. And then Starmer's doing the same thing. He's coming to every decision within power and going right when he should go left. And I think this is why Farage becomes such a popularist sort of figure within politics, is because he makes the right noises, he makes the right comments, and he's tapped into the national feeling or the national sort of
Yeah. I think
pulse,
a lot of the
if you
problem with
will.
Labour there is
And
Ed Miliband changed the system when he got in, so it became purely a members' vote for who the leader was, which is very democratic.
right,
But when your membership is a lot more left than the centre ground of the country that you're going for to win an election, that's why they've then gone with Jeremy Corbyn.
yeah,
And you get the activists voting for someone who most agrees with them, who doesn't convince the people in the centre, so you don't
yes,
end up winning the election. Whereas if you if
it makes
with
sense.
Reform, they've had Farage as leader and then democratising the party. And I think if something was to happen to
Mm,
Farage, if fingers crossed he doesn't, if he got hit by a double decker bus tomorrow, sort of thing, it would then be a process to
yeah,
establish who the next leader would be. And we're very fortunate. We've got a lot of good candidates, which I think is telling of all the parties.
yeah. I mean, I think 100%. I think I like Zia Youssef. Is almost like no nonsense, and I do like the way he kind of always tries and brings it back to the core of the issue. So, like I said on the question time panel the other night with Zach Polanski, it did have a little bit of a nibble back, like you did with the flag comment, which was brilliant, and it is, that's relatable to people on the street in terms of that band, as it's a very
Yeah,
British
it's a
thing to
thin
have
line
banter,
though between
very
having
very
to go at
British
each
thing.
other for the sake of it.
100%. There's got to be some substance there rather than just having a go at one another. They've then got to have a little bit of substance behind that sort of tongue-in-cheek comment or banter, whatever it may be. And he's very good at doing that. And a lot of his points that he makes are very valid. And I kind of find myself agreeing with him a lot. And I think, moving on to the sort of Doge thing, I think that's where from when Elon Musk did it in, it was almost like a pantomime watching it happen day on day on day in the States with Elon Musk and Trump, and they were reading out what the government was spending money on. And I think one of the funnest ones was like, I think it was $60 million to make mice transgender in Ethiopia, which was like it was laughable. And I think it turned out there was 20 NGOs per American citizen um, that were funneling, taxpayer money into left, right, and center. And basically, it was in essence, from the outside looking in, it was a big money laundering scam and scheme, a big Ponzi scheme. That was what was happening. And ever since that sort of came to light, if you don't think that is happening here, I think you're very naive. Um, and I like when we were speaking off camera before, and you mentioned about a similar Doge system. Um, I mean, what does that look like? Does it look like a third party out of government organization that comes in and has that sort of governmental um, accountability, or is it within government that makes sure that you make everything transparent to the
I
public?
think the national one in America was very different to here because one, they've got a lot bigger budget.
Mm,
Two, they're less transparent
yeah,
already because of our transparency laws. They're not comparable in America in terms of how transparent they are with what government money gets spent on. And then also because Reform have taken power and are the only people willing to do a Doge style process in councils. So
yeah,
you're talking about a county council level, which isn't national. So county councils aren't spending the big money internationally. And if you look at, I think
no,
we both probably know the UK government is spending money on all these schemes in other countries and spending tens of millions here, there, and everywhere. But then they suddenly say, oh no, we don't have
yeah,
money for that. We need to, yeah,
there's
there's
no
no
money.
money, but we've got a lot of money for that. But then there's no money
Yeah,
for you, sort of thing.
or, or as we say up north, they've got
Yeah,
short arms and
but
deep pockets.
it's very different in a county council. And what Reform did as a party initially was say we'll have one team going round of people with a
Mm,
wide range of sort of forensic IT based skills and business acumen to go in and drill down into it and develop the expertise of doing that in councils. And unfortunately, they've had a lot of
right.
resistance from people who oppose it.
Mm.
And I don't really understand this because they
Yeah,
they
why do you
throw
think
up
they
the
oppose it?
sharing of data, which is obviously it is a concern who gets access to what data, but
Yeah,
there's already so many organisations who get access to council's data, and to think that the objective was to go in and sell off data, I think it would be you're at greater risk with like software providers and things like that who may sell data on than you are with people coming
100%.
in where they're clear. The software provider is providing you with software for profit, and especially if they're a very big
Yeah,
organization, they don't need you. And you've got
100%.
alternatives to go elsewhere, but sometimes they might be the best choice and you're beholden to them. Whereas a reform Dodge
Yeah,
hit squad going in, they've got one clear purpose of being there, which is to save the taxpayer money. And the suggestion,
yeah. Or it's not even to save taxpayer money because the fact of the in my opinion, is the fact of the matter. Right. Well, I did a post recently. Over the past 4 years, there's 3.25 trillion pounds been collected in tax, and yet it goes up every year, but services are diminishing. You growing up in the same sort of locality, you used to have your bins emptied every week. It's now every month or every 3 weeks, but yet I'm still paying more. So services are diminishing when we're actually paying more for it. And I understand obviously inflation and so on and so forth. So it's not I don't if the Doge sort of hit squads happen and it doesn't actually save money, but we can say, oh no, it's legit. We actually do need this money because it's being spent X, Y, Z. Then from a taxpayer's perspective and from a voter's perspective, it's like, right, okay, that's fine.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
crack on
think the
then.
problem is you've got the
Yeah,
opposition politicians who are using and not necessarily just the politicians, also their supporter bases, because they've been the ones in power. So finding waste that happened under them is basically
yes.
like a load of political grenades with absolutely everything you find. So because they know that it's really inefficient, they don't want it highlighted. So I think they're using the data sharing thing to serve a political agenda. And they know if they can stop reform
Mm,
looking at it through that means, they think they've um, combated it. So what we've done in Lancashire and what a lot of the other councils have either done already or are in the earlier stages of doing is just doing it ourselves. So we've got
yeah,
a team of people within Lancashire County Council who everybody does it a little bit, but some focus a lot more on it, myself included, who look a lot more into this sort of thing. But there's a lot of examples of things where you look at it and they're spending money and you just think, why are they doing that? That's an absolute waste. So they're spending money on
yeah,
even just a few months ago on films about refugees and theatre shows about refugees in Lancaster, and you
yeah.
just think that's taxpayer money going on propaganda.
It's a
Yeah,
It's a
when
luxury,
you're
yeah.
struggling with,
But
yeah,
it's not even. I mean, you can look at it, yeah. You can look at it from a propaganda perspective, but at the same time, it's like that's not the role of a government or a council or a government. That is a role of a council or a government is to make sure that council services run smoothly, efficiently, with as little waste as possible. Putting on frigging cabaret shows or this, that, the other. It's
yeah,
not
people
in a
don't want to be
council's remit.
socially engineered into thinking a certain thing. They think I can make my own mind
Yeah.
up. I pay you money to provide me with services, and I don't pay you money to tell
Yes.
me what I should think about X, Y, or Z. And it's So there's things that go past
Yeah,
that line where it's just immediate, obvious. But at a county level, there's less of that than national. Because if you go through the national spending, you're just like, look at all this overseas spending. Why are we doing that when we've got all this debt in this
yeah,
country? We
yeah.
can't afford it. Do we actually get a return on that investment? No. But then,
This episode is brought to you by Vanavasa Coffee. Since going caffeine free, I've realised how hard it is to find a genuinely good decaf coffee. Most of them taste flat, weak, or like they're just there to tick a box for the few of us that don't want or need that caffeine hit. But I still love coffee. The morning ritual, the warmth, the silence that comes with that first sip. And that's how I came across Vanavasa Coffee. A brand inspired by the wilderness, built around presence, purpose, and balance. Their coffees are grown all over the world and roasted right here in the UK. Each blend tells a story. I've partnered with Vanavasa Coffee because it's about more than caffeine. It's about connection and the ritual. Right now, they're inviting a small group to join before they launch. You can register your interest and get 15% off your first order by visiting cutthes.com/sponsors and clicking on Vanavasa Coffee. That's cutthes.com/sponsors and clicking on Vanavasa Coffee.
with a council level stuff, it's like, it's different. So there's a lot of bloated stuff. And it's one of my colleagues described going into anything at the council as he said it's like trying to build something on the archaeology of York. And when you go down, there's all these different layers to it, and it's like, well, we did it this way this long
Yeah,
ago, and then it changed to this, and then it changed to that,
yeah,
and
yeah.
things become very, very bloated, and you end up with it costs. I think it's over 30 grand. I think it's quite a bit more than that to put in a zebra crossing, which is a couple of lights on poles
Right.
and painting the ground. But because we
Yeah,
have all these laws that tie your hands on safety and all these processes you have to go through, so there's so
yeah,
many
yeah.
people involved when you could just literally get somebody with expertise in doing it who knows how to do it to go and paint it, put the pole and wire the
Well,
electrics up,
that
and it's
that's.
people
I
looking
mean,
at you think 30 grand, that's a lot of money. Like you could buy a
yeah.
house for that in our town.
Well, that was I was in construction, and one of the things that always baffled me. I've known companies that only do drop curbs. That's all they install.
Yeah,
Like for somebody's driveway, and because of the license, they can charge over 1,500, 2 grand just to put a drop curb in. When I know the materials and the labor, it's a day's labor, but the material you could do it for
yeah.
5, 6, 7, 800
Good. I
quid,
think if you had more
and
power in
and
the
it's like,
communities to have a bit more direct
mm,
responsibility, that might solve it. But because everything's so bloated
that
up,
yeah, it's that bureaucracy. Well, it's bureaucracy gone mad, isn't it? In terms of the fact that you've got to have this. There's a scene in it's one of my favorite guilty pleasure films, actually, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you've ever watched it with Martin Freeman, really funny, and they've got like a depressed robot that follows them around, and they're going to save somebody from being put to death, and it was like, have you filled in this form correctly? And they've got to go and fill a form in to get this prisoner of release form, and then, oh no, no, now you've got to go and fill in this N2 whatever form, and then you've got to fill in this form. And it's almost like, I understand that you can't just abolish every piece of legislation and every piece of sort of red tape, because people will take advantage of it, especially within the construction world, and vice versa. But at the same time, how
yeah,
far is too far? And then when does it stop becoming efficient and start
yeah,
becoming wasteful? And that's not just on
yeah.
money;
And
it's
then
on time
at
as
the
well.
council, you've got to, with any bit of spending that you're looking at, you've got to look at it and think, right, what is the national legislation that ties our hands? And with a lot of that, I personally think you should take more of an approach of, which councils don't typically like doing, of, all right, well, what happens if we don't do it? Because that legislation says that we should do
Yeah,
this, but is there a legal argument for not doing it? Is there some legislation somewhere that means that we can get out of it? But you've got to have people with the legal expertise to
yeah,
spend the time looking at that. But then you've also got
Yeah.
a lot of businesses think doing business with a council is hard work, or they don't want to jump through all the hoops. So then, and it's risk. You've got to spend a lot of time bidding for a tender that you might not necessarily win. So you'd rather just
Yeah.
pick
Yeah.
up the
Yeah.
phone and say, "Yeah, I can do that next week, mate," rather than filling out a tender for in 9 months and you might not win it. So then you've got this,
Yeah. Yeah.
you've got to look through that and then think, what can we do to change those things? But then also, how much of the council's policies are also a factor in this? And then there's a lot of things that the council are doing that sort of
Yeah.
sound nicey, where they go, oh, we'll help try and solve this problem, we'll help try and solve that problem, and we'll help develop that area. And then you look at it, you just think, we don't really have the money. There's a cricket pitch being built in Preston for which Lancashire County Council have contributed a lot to, for Lancashire's second team and the women's team. And if you look at the priorities, it's second
Right.
team cricket and women's cricket, and then some kids cricket, and then community stuff.
Yeah.
And then right at the bottom of the list of priorities in order is using it for profit. So it's a pure, they've got money from the
Right.
English Cricket Board, and I think Lancashire Cricket Club put some in. I think Preston City Council might have put some in, and Lancashire County Council did as well. So it's like this collaborative effort where they say, oh, well, we'll match all the funding, but there's
Mm.
1.2 billion pounds of debt. So there's all the
Wow.
debt floating around. And like while you're doing that, you're
Yeah.
thinking, well, is a cricket pitch? God knows how many cricket pitches there are across Lancashire. And I know it's been this old trope of like, oh, Lancashire Cricket Club play in Manchester because that used to be in
Yeah.
Lancashire.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be great if they played in Lancashire? But if it's not done in a profitable way, where you look at, can we build it in a way that yeah, it's
But it's
not sustainable.
unsustainable.
And if it's propping up second teams of women's cricket, which aren't going to get the crowds in, I think it's fair to say that's not going to. It's going to be operating at a loss in all likelihood. Does that
Yeah.
model work? And then you look at it
And
and
I
you think,
think
well, if we're having to make really tough decisions on core services and we can't pick the bins up, the
yes.
council has become so far removed from what it should be doing.
Yeah, well, you've just touched on it perfectly, and you know, like we've touched on for Nigel Farage a little bit, and why I think he's such a popular figure at the minute in British politics is I there's things that are said on interviews and things that are said in media and at that sort of council level, and it almost it shocks me and stops me in my tracks because it is so it's such a microcosm in terms of like for instance, Oliver Ryan, who's the local MP, um, uh, and I've mentioned this before, and I'm hoping to have him on
Good luck.
at some point, and it's. Well, we'll see. I've messaged him. He said he will. So props to him if he does. But the comment when Angela Rayner got fired for, in essence, what was tax evasion could have been, in terms of money laundering, whatever. It was a financial crime. That's what it was. And all that happened to her was she lost a job.
Well, she didn't
That was it.
actually.
She,
Two things
if
that
it
it's not
happened to
actually a
me,
fact. It's not technically.
no, true.
It's
She
not
didn't lose a job. She
technically
resigned.
looking like,
Yeah,
based on the available evidence, it's not a crime. What she was either careless or deliberate in terms of not paying the right amount of tax, which HMRC will deal with by finding different amounts.
yeah.
So it's not technically like a crime where you'd be prosecuted in all likelihood, but that's just based on
Okay,
the available evidence. She didn't. She only lost her role
yeah.
as deputy prime minister. She's not had to stand down as an MP. Which, if she got criminally
No,
prosecuted, she would.
but
You would be able to trigger a recall petition.
which I understand, but this is the sort of disillusionment I think from a voter perspective to a politician perspective, is the fact that you've got people that are having to choose between feeding the kids or putting the heating on across the country, and then you've got this person who's deputy prime minister that's you know miscalculated or whatever it may be. 100 was it £180,000 tax bill on an
In
£800,000
Brighton.
second home. in bright, and it's like, you know, you talk about polarizing in terms of media, right and left. That's polarizing in a really negative sense. And what Oliver Ryan put on, and don't get me wrong, you know, I don't know his personal relationship with Angela Rayner, but he serves as an MP for a town that isn't, you know, one of the highest affluent areas in the country. It's probably under the national average in terms of average wage per annum, and it's he's quite, oh, you know, it's sad to see our Ange go today, and this, that, the other. And it's like, no, you need to read the room a little bit. Is the fact that the people in your constituency are struggling month to month and paycheck to paycheck, where this person that you're feeling sorry for has managed to try and evade £180,000. She's been caught out, and it's that sort of um, not being able to see what's wrong with that. it it's rife across all British. You know, I'm not just picking on him; it's throughout all British politics, which is why I think, from a reform perspective, and I want to ask you this question in a minute. I think that's why they're doing so well, is because they have kind of stepped down from that political um, parapet and gone, look, you know, we are for the people, we are listening to you, like we've just discussed in regards to Doge. That would be, you know, a normal thing in any company, right? Where's the pennies being spent? Is it efficient? You know, why is our profit margin X when it could be X? And that's a normal thing that any normal person, i.e., myself, would expect from, you know, a government entity or a council entity. So, you know, and I haven't necessarily asked you, but I can probably guess the answer. Why did you actually go out to and pick reform, or was it just sort of you wanted to do something and you kind of looked at all of the political parties and settled on reform, or what, was it chicken before the egg or egg
Well,
before the
I
chicken?
had my views, which have developed over the years, and I used to work at the county council years ago, so I
Yeah,
did have some good insight because I worked in procurement, which is spending
right, okay,
um, just over half off the top of my head of the total gross budget. So when you've worked in a department spending a lot of the money, you sort of see the waste. I remember there was a cleaner
yeah, yeah,
who worked there everyone's on flexi time. And sometimes I'd stay late and get
right,
the work done while it was quiet. A lot of people went in early, um, and then just sort of build up the early finishers sort of stereotypical attitude.
yeah, yeah,
Um, how much work they did in the morning varied from person to person. I'm not saying this from the outside of someone slamming council workers.
no,
I'm
no,
saying
no,
that from my experience within that department, but it was many years ago.
yeah, yeah,
A lot
yeah,
of them like work from home now as well, and it's still on a sort of flexi time basis. Um, if so later on, people wouldn't generally be there, and there was a cleaner who went round, and I asked him
yeah.
what his name was, and he started crying, and I said, "What? Like, what's wrong?" And he said, "I've worked here cleaning this department now for 2 years, and no one's ever asked me my name." And he
Wow,
said, "You're the first person." And he just said,
wow,
"People are so horrible to me. They they just say, 'Oh, can you come back later?' And like, I'm still working. Can you like wipe my bit of the desk later? Because it was all on the like hot desking." And just for context, the
yeah, yeah,
procurement team had just moved into that built bit of the building. It was a different team in there beforehand. I don't know which. So but he just
yeah,
meant in
yeah.
general, like he'd worked
Wow.
for the council cleaning, and he just said no one's ever asked him who he is. He's just like the help. And I thought that guy must be on an
Yeah,
absolute
yeah.
pittance um, compared to some of the people here who earn a lot more money. And
And
yeah,
it doesn't
and
cost
just people
anything.
don't spare the time of day, and we're working and spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. And it's like I see the waste and how somebody uh, will make a decision and something gets procured in a way where it could be done a lot more efficiently. Um, an example from them of like there was a big
Do you think
overspend
it's
on concrete because they didn't engage with the market properly and understand there's only a few concrete producers. They have maps based on where their base is and how far out they have to go to deliver it. And rather than working in a way
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah.
worked well with where they covered geographically, it was like, no, we want to buy in this way. They fed back saying, well, that won't really it'll work in some areas and not in others, and they ironed it out. So then you got
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
small
yeah.
supplier who earned a fortune because he'd worked out where these areas were because he knew his competitors, and he just named his price because he knew they wouldn't bid in other areas. But because it was all under
Right.
contract, like it was very difficult to actually combat
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Do you think it's through do you think, in terms of talking about the cleaner and stuff, and especially through being inefficient in a fiscal sense, do you think it's through ignorance, ego, or do you think it's just through sheer
I think
sheer
it's a
ineptitude?
combination. It's the same whether it's politicians or council staff. You get people who
Yeah.
um, you can get people who don't have the right experience for a role and they've not necessarily started in that role who
Mm.
or just aren't good at the job, or you can get some very good people at the job. You can get people who develop an ego, or something might happen in the personal life and they stop take their eye off the prize at work and start making bad
Yeah, yeah,
decisions.
yeah.
There's so many things go into it. And my old boss when I worked there actually said to me, it's like if you picture a pyramid and there's lots of people in the
Yeah.
bottom lower paid roles, there's lots of room. It's not competitive because there's enough room for everybody on that layer of it. And you
Yeah,
go,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the more you go up, the less space there is, and the more people there are below trying to get up for very few places on top. And people get promoted up there, not always based on the best traits or their ability to do the job at the level above. They
Mhm.
might be great, a great person, great at the job that they do. It doesn't mean that they're going to be the best person to do the job at the next level. And the guy who's been here for half the time,
Yeah, 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 I get you.
um, he'll be better at that job. He might not even be as good at the job at the lower level, but he'll be better at the top level because he's got a different skill set for it. But or loyalty
Yes.
may get rewarded and things like that. Someone and people get promoted. It's called the Peter Principle beyond their actual based on
Yeah, yeah,
what they've
yeah.
done in past roles or for the wrong reasons.
Well, I think they did. The fast tracking stuff, they've done it in a lot of sort of industries in terms of the fast track to management. I think it was one of the worst things to ever be implemented, because what it did in my, don't get me wrong, there will be some success stories left, right, and center where they've got fast tracked and they have been amazing in a managerial role. But I think on the whole, what it has been a difficult. You can't get somebody that's been, I've seen it in certain companies that I've known about where they've been in 6 months and then ended up becoming an operations manager, and you think you can't do that job because you don't have the experience yet, and ultimately it's either a very steep learning curve where everybody within the company suffers, and in a council that's what would generally happen, or they stick at it and they end up coming good, or
Yeah.
they end up getting sacked,
And
or
politics can be
stood
exactly the
down.
same. And you look at some of these people at
Yeah.
Lancashire County Council and at the borough, on the borough councils, and you just think you've been doing this in some cases for decades. You just think you don't have a clue,
Mm.
and you just play this game if you want like it's a PR game.
Yeah.
They'll just find some issue to kick off a fuss over. They don't show any level of responsibility of
Yeah.
going, right, you know what I mean? The council's in a tight financial
Yeah.
situation.
Accountability.
Can we do X, Y, or Z
Yeah.
instead of doing what you're suggesting? And that'll save the same amount of money. I think it'll be less impactful. They just say, oh, we don't want you to do this. These are horrible people for doing this. We wouldn't do this. Save save this building or save this service. And it's like, well, you understand the finances, or it's even worse if you don't understand that side of it. So you get all these
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
shouldn't be in it. Oliver Ryan's a prime example where he's never had
Hmm.
no, sorry, he worked for a very left-wing think tank for 3 months. Other than that, he's been a counsellor and a student. So I think it was his mum or his
Yeah.
auntie is best mates with Angela Rayner, which is why he calls her Auntie Angela or our Angela. And
got you.
So
That
then he's
makes
worked
sense.
for a Labour think tank or one of those sort of like left wing organisations where it's not like a not what people would call a in Burnley would call a proper job, and only briefly.
Yeah,
He's then risen up as a councillor to he used to be a lead for finance and resources briefly, um, at Tameside, I think that
yeah.
was, and then he was cabinet member for like children and young people's services when they got an inadequate rating, which says a lot. But then because he's
Wow.
moved around and he's developed relationships with the right people, so you like some Angela Rayner, Labour then spent more,
Yeah,
I heard, I can't fact check this because it'd take a long time to work it all out, but
yeah. So,
yeah,
small
disclaimer,
disclaimer.
more on his campaign here than any other one of the constituencies in the last election. And I think he'd have had a good
Wow.
chance anyway if they hadn't done that. But whether true or not,
Well, yeah. I think any
yeah,
Labour
so
candidate
then
would
he's
have done.
been
Yeah.
dropped into an area that he's got no connection with to stand as an MP. And I'm not a big fan of when people do that without being um,
Hmm.
without necessarily having any tie to the place or being a big name. If Farage got dropped into Burnley, I'd be saying,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
great, I'd love to have Farage as my
It's
MP
different.
or
Yeah, I
somebody
get
I
that.
know. But if it's somebody who was a reform councillor on Tameside Council, I think, well, he better be bloody good. And when you look at Oliver Ryan's track record,
Yeah. Well, I think
I don't see any capability there necessarily.
especially.
He's not a stupid guy. It's just,
Yeah. No, and I think it'd be unfair to say that he doesn't do anything decent or anything good. I've seen things that he's done which are uh, causes that are close to my heart that he's sort of supported, and he's done X, Y, Z. But then at the same time, I think you're absolutely bang on the money, especially in the UK. I've lived abroad. I've lived in the States, and I've lived in Africa, and more so in the UK than anywhere else that I've been in the world. There's such subtle nuances, but you know it for a fact. Between Burnley and Blackburn, which is what 15 minutes away, there is a completely different culture in Burnley than there is in Blackburn, and even closer, Padiham and Burnley, which are next door to each other. There is a different feeling in Padiham than there is in Burnley. It's quite similar, but there is a different feeling, and there is subtle nuances. And I think if anybody that becomes an MP or a prominent member of politics within that area doesn't know them nuances or hasn't lived them or felt them, they're at a severe disadvantage. And that goes for the same, Tyneside, Newcastle, Manchester. It makes such a big difference when somebody from that area, gains whether to be a member of parliament or whoever within that area, because they understand the people from a ground level upwards, rather than from trying to learn it from upwards down to ground level, which is
yeah.
always
And
a very,
around
very
here,
difficult thing
and
to
like
do.
I represent both Paddy and Burnley, and there's a lot of
Yeah,
different places all over both Paddy and Burnley. Pubs are different. There's a lot of difference between people.
yeah, yeah.
I had a meeting at County Hall. I was in a suit. Went for a meeting in Padiham afterwards. I can't remember what it was. And then I called into a pub, and a bloke said to me, "Are you a cop?" And he was mistrustful. I ended up having quite a few pints with him. And throughout it was only towards the end that he started believing that I wasn't a police officer. He wouldn't tell me his name for a while, which was just a bit of banter. But that's the sort of local
Yeah,
thing where you can have a laugh about it if you're from around here and you understand this people's sense of humour.
100%.
Um,
Yeah, well, that's the thing. What you've just said reminded me. I used to work for a company that were London based, and it came to Christmas, and they'd paid for all expenses paid Christmas do in London at a place called, I think it was either called Ping or Pong, and it was like a table tennis bar, like really good do. And there was one of the bosses that walked in that I always got on with. I'll never forget his name. I can't remember his last name, but he was called Steve. And he walked in with, like one of them Pringle jumpers, but it was tied around his shoulders, like he'd
yeah,
just come off the golf course. And I said to him, I said, "Oh, what's your handicap?" And he lost, like, completely lost it. Like, you don't know me, you don't know my upbringing. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I actually didn't think that you'd just been playing golf. It was a joke, and it's understanding, like you said, that nuance of up here that had been laughed off. Everybody
So you're just
had have
being
had a
friendly.
giggle, and he'd have gone, "Oh yeah,
People
all
think,
right,
oh, you're cracking a
yeah."
joke,
And
you're
it's
being friendly. Unless someone's got a real attitude problem. If you say it with a smile on
yes,
your face, people think, oh yeah, you say that because I look like I've just been playing
that's it.
golf with my fashion choice. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, he was from Essex, and I, obviously being from up here, it was just like a completely different culture clash. Now, down there, maybe northern banter, where the the sign of affection. I was out last night for one of my friends' birthdays, and the sign of affection is to sort of basically take the piss out of them for all the evening, and vice versa. You expect somebody to take the mickey out of you, and that's how we bond as friends, and that's how we, especially from a male perspective. Whereas I know now through experience that down south that is not, especially in Essex, it's not
yeah.
necessarily
Oh,
a done thing.
there's a different manner to it. They
Um,
might not necessarily start off with it like we
yes,
would, whereas it is just
yes,
like a bonding thing with a stranger a lot of the time, especially if you're out in a sort of drinking environment or a going out environment. That it's quite normal for
yeah,
people
yeah.
to do that, and people wind each other up for fun and things like that. It's a different. It's hard to put your
Well,
finger on
yeah,
it, isn't it? But yeah, I think going
life would be boring.
and
Life would be
Oliver
boring
Ryan,
without that.
yeah, Oliver
In my
Ryan's
opinion, is
Northern, but he doesn't strike me as very. You know
banterish.
what? When you speak to him, because I've spoken to him in person, you can have a laugh with him.
Mm,
He just doesn't get
yeah,
it.
yeah,
He's just. I've said to him, he's tone deaf. And when people are like having a go at him and things like
right.
that, he'll be arrogant and block them rather than. And like he must have got
And I
half of
think,
Burnley blocked
yeah,
on Facebook, so he doesn't get people asking him
yeah, yeah,
questions he don't want to answer and things on his Facebook. So he can put a post out there, and all you see is positive responses. He seems to cull the
positives,
majority of
yeah.
other
And I
stuff, and it's
think
like
this.
people don't like that around here.
No, people. Well, people don't like that anywhere. I think it's really interesting. One of, I think it was might have been one of my therapists has said to me before. A lot of resentment and a lot of sort of discourse is caused through misinterpreted expectations. So you know, in regards to people like Oliver Ryan, not sort of engaging in what would in essence necessarily be somebody having a go at him, um, discussing that and getting understanding that in politics you can actually come to middle ground between somebody that doesn't like you and you're doing XYZ and you think that's the right, you can come to some middle ground where they can go, right, okay, I don't agree with you, but that's cleared that
Yeah,
up,
and
so
it's
to
hard. I think
speak.
as an MP as well, it's
um
hard to sort of. It must be very hard to go into an area that you don't know and try and learn about
yes,
it and get along with the people when they're quite unique compared to other places in the country, and you're not from around there or necessarily very like them. Um, but then it's also like you mentioned, like his championed causes and things like that. MPs highlighting issues can have an effect. But then it's like, what do people want to see? And I
mm,
find this with councillors as well. And it's you get these councillors who can like say, "Oh yeah, there's this issue, and I'm gonna talk about it," which is it gives a voice to it.
yeah,
But if the voice, it depends how loud the voice is and whether that actually yeah,
does
and
it
do
fall on
people
deaf
already know
ears?
about it? You get ones who decide to start going reporting potholes or fly tipping and things like that, which is a good public service. But
Yeah.
anybody in the community can do that. You don't need to be a councillor to do it. So then
Hmm.
you look at what are the things that a councillor can do that other people can't do, because
That nobody else can do.
anyone with any sort of
Yes,
platform in Burnley. And there's people who work in all sorts of different walks of life who've got loads of mates, who've got a big following on social media, or might be an influencer who people in
Yeah,
Birmingham
yeah,
listen
yeah.
to, or in the country. So it's like that's not what your MP is. They can do that as part of it,
No.
but then it's like, what is the MP?
Well, but it's
Yeah, so it's
surplus.
what
It
is the
should be
MP actually
surplus.
doing? And then if you've spent over 12 months, you've just over 12 months in, and you spent about 6 months of that frozen out of the party you were elected to, you've not been able to take any place in
True.
what that party in government are doing. And then I've not seen him do much other than you see these little things where they'll stand up in Parliament when there's hardly anyone there on some quiet debate about something, and they'll just mention the local area for a social
Yeah, yeah,
media
yeah.
clip, and then that's all they do. And it's like he might
Well,
be doing
this
things behind the scenes, but I
that
don't know what it
yeah.
is.
Well, that transparency and that you've just hit the nail on that almost like that politics for clout, and a lot of people and a lot of politicians do that in terms of it's almost look how amazing I am, but it's almost empty words because it doesn't actually lead to anything or lead to any change. And at the same time, um, I one of throughout my life, understanding, especially over the last 7 years, one of the biggest things to engage with people, and this is what I've sort of, especially this week, coming up to the starting of the recording of all these episodes for the podcast, it's authenticity has got to be right at the heart of this. And it's got to be authentic from my perspective. And this is what I want to know. This is what I feel. And it might seem very, very selfish, but I don't think I'm in this boat on my own. I think there's other people that might want to know what I want to know, or want to ask the questions or have the discussions that I feel. Might be completely wrong on that, and I might be completely on my own and shouting into the wind. But what I sort of don't comprehend is if I was in a political party. So say we changed places. You were podcasting. I was Reform UK councillor, politician, and I ended up becoming MP. And the digital ID thing came up. Now you have obviously party allegiance, as you always do, because there's no point in parties in that sense. But if you didn't believe in that, and I think this is what I see in reform quite a lot, which is really good. It's almost an internal discourse. Is the fact that no, I don't really agree with that, but on X Y Z they're completely bang on the money. And I think with people like Oliver Ryan, when they were talking about the digital ID, it's anybody with half a brain can understand why they're bringing it in. It's nothing to do with immigration. Don't treat us as the public as idiots and naive when we can all see through the charade and see through the fancy words and Starmer's sort of speech of or Blair's speech of it improves the relationship between the government and yourself and this the whole point of a government is to serve the people and have as little impact on their uh, the public's lives as possible. They should almost be seen and not heard. And it makes. I was speaking to somebody the other day, and I was like, when Margaret Thatcher starts to sound actually, make sense and sound normal and not like the Iron Lady that everybody sort of purported her to be, and she actually looks tame in comparison to the current government that we have. We need to just stop and have a think and have a reassess of where we're at, And one of her speeches, I was watching it the other day, where she was saying, people do have to fight to keep freedom, and I don't necessarily think it's in the. I don't think people are doing it in the correct manner at this moment in time from a personal perspective. I think protests are just loud white noise that don't really change or get anything done. And I think you particularly are kind of trying to do it the right way from within rather than, there's no use of being on a corner at a picket line with a placard saying do this, do that, do the other, because it doesn't really, well, it's proven it doesn't change anything at a government or policy level. Whereas from within, you can enact change, like you've said with the Doge thing, is the fact that people were resisting it. Right, well, we'll just create our own, and we'll just do it ourselves, and we'll just make sure that what we believe needs to get done gets done in a manner without all the red tape. Doing that way is 100%, in my
And it's
opinion, the
doing it
correct
to
way to
serve,
do it.
people call us populists, but it's to serve, your job as a government is to try and serve the majority. And you get torn between what your supporter base thinks and what the most vocal amongst the supporter base thinks, as Labour are doing, and they just flail
Mm.
around between what the other parties are saying, what the media are saying, and what the supporter base is saying, and what they
Yeah, yeah,
themselves think. It's like, to me, it's pretty clear you just have to serve what you think the majority of people, which in my ward in Padiham and Burnley West is quite easy because the majority of people are aligned on most issues and they're pretty understanding, so it's
yeah,
quite easy. But then I think that's where Reform have got a big strength, which is when people say like being populist is a bad thing, being populist is also quite a good thing because if you want to do something that the public don't want, you've got to convince them or you're betraying. If Reform start dictating things that the public
yeah,
really didn't want, it's on them to convince the public of why we need to do this and keep that trust there. So council tax is one. A lot of
yeah.
reform councils are raising council tax, and some of them said things that like we're going to start the process of looking at freezing it. But I think the public in general, the opposition are quick to chime up about it, but the public in general know that central government don't fund councils and there's loads of waste there and it's complicated to solve it. That most people know the things that we've discussed on at least a base level,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and they'll know that or appreciate if told you're still on the budget of the previous administration who set it for the next year before you've got into power. You've still got all the processes and stuff in
yeah.
place. It takes time to change it, and the government basically expects councils to raise council tax every year, and costs are going up. So you're trying to get things down while costs are going up and make all these changes. It just takes time.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
don't think anybody expected it to be like
Well, I think,
overnight, really easy.
but this, you know what? Right, Tom, pick up for PM, because the thing is, with the way that you've just described that, then, and the way that you've just sort of put that across, this is this is the issue for me, and it's almost like British politics in a nutshell. Is we as a public are well aware that when a political party takes power, it just, the previous, so Labour have taken over from Conservative government. The Conservative government just doesn't stop and the Labour one takes place. There is obviously that 12 to 18 months transition period where they maybe shut things down, or things need to come to an end or to a fruition on a 12-month contract that has been previously signed by a Conservative government, and it's then the Labour government can then take over completely. Most people would understand that and comprehend that. I think that the way that you explained it is perfect, but the way it gets explained on a national stage, from, it could be anywhere, it could be, and I don't think Farage would do this. However, it wouldn't surprise me if he did, because every single politician or prime minister has done it previously. Is, well, we're having to deal with concert. It's almost like that name calling. Oh, well, they messed it up, they fucked it up, and we're having to put it right. And it's like, well, no, if you actually just explained that this is what's happening, we've got to come to the end of this transition period, and then we can start enacting what we want to enact. We can't just do it straight away. Most people within the country would be like, well, yeah, yeah, no, it makes sense, fair, right? So we can all lump in together, and we've just got to make it through this next 12 months to get to the point where what we
Yeah,
voted for
I think with
happens.
Starmer, people just didn't know
Um,
what necessarily they were voting for either. It was
no,
just a
well, I think they did.
Well,
It
yeah,
was
but I
just
think
all
it was just
lies.
someone who sort of held the vase. He gets absolutely hammered for stuff, and he
Yeah,
said like he's going to smash the gangs and stuff like that. I don't think many people actually even believed he was going to do it. They were just sick of the Tories. It were a protest vote, and he looked semi credible with how he came across because he wasn't extreme like Corbyn. I don't think, in reality, I don't think
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
anybody, as much as people can be fairly frustrated if he's not done things, I don't think many people actually thought he was going to do anything. I think trust in politics is that low.
Anything
It's like
amazing.
you
Yeah.
all pee in the same pot, and you just say whatever, and you're only interested in your own roles. I think for a lot of people, they go into it, realize how difficult governing is, and then they just start thinking about themselves and
Hmm.
PR, and it becomes all about that. The
Yes.
Tories in Lancashire, they just you can see how they've done it, where they've just sort of gone in with a thing of what can we take credit for, what can we put out there as a good story, and what can we bash other people
Hmm.
about, and how can we make people think that we're credible rather than actually thinking how can we address the underlying big issues here, which is the councils getting more and more in debt over time and getting more and more bloated,
Yeah.
and they'll pander rather than sticking to the principles, they'll pander to pressure. So that's why you ended up with a lot of problems, is because you've got people in power for a long period of time like that who'll just make a debate about
Yeah.
something that's not going on. I think that's something that Reform need to be very responsible about, is putting that, like I raised the council tax thing, rather than just going, well, what
Mm.
sort of media or PR work can I do where it's softball questions and makes me look good, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
maybe only doing a short. Sarah Poaching was on BBC Politics Northwest this morning for about 8 minutes between three people. So it's like you don't get
Right.
much chance to go into it. So you're just firing a few shots off at each other in that time or getting a little sound bite in there. Not her
Yeah,
fault, I
yeah,
don't.
yeah.
Well, good on her for doing it. But that's the
No.
BBC's
And
fault
and
for, yeah.
it must be difficult. Yeah, it must be really difficult from a politician's perspective not to sort of get drawn into, like, so, you know, um you look at the politicians that could have been great prime ministers or could have been great leaders, and it must be very, very difficult because if you've got anything about you, which you generally hope they would have when they get to that stage, if the name's on the ballot, you know that if you don't play this game of name calling and backbiting and making the others look bad, you've probably got a very slim to non chance of gaining any power. And at the same time, I know, which is probably why I've chosen this route instead of a politician route, is the fact that I know morally I couldn't play by them rules, because I would want to speak about actual important issues rather than, oh, well, you do know he's a meat eater and we're vegans, like that sort of bullshit that doesn't really
Yeah.
wash with anybody. It doesn't matter. It's
We've
not
we've taken an
meaningful.
approach with that
And this,
of, if people have a go at you, it's like if a bully comes over and punches at you in a playground, there is a strong argument for if you hit him
yeah.
back, he won't do it again. Or he'll at least save it for when
Yeah.
it's needed. And I think a lot,
Or think
yeah, and
twice
it's
next
like
time.
we've
Yeah.
taken an approach of don't go on the attack about people, but then if
Mm.
highlight the issues. But I think because we're taking over from people, particularly the Tories are bad for this, and they've lost a lot of their votes towards reform. But all the opposition, to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
fair, apart from a few of them who are like the independent ones, who aren't really involved in, which the leader of the opposition is, to be
No.
fair, and he's probably the most constructive person in Lancashire County Council in the opposition. Um, they just want to fire a load of shots at you. So there was a thing on Hyndburn Labour put
Mm.
out about one of our Hyndburn County Councillors, Joel Tetlow. He's just been made the chair of the Pensions Committee, and that gets a
All right.
special responsibility allowance of just over 10 grand a year on top of the basic
All right.
allowance that all county councillors get. So they put out this
Yeah, yeah.
portal saying like, look, he's lying in his pockets, he's no experience running a pensions fund. But then you look at it and you think, well, when Labour were last in power at LCC, your county councillor had no experience running a pensions fund, and got the special responsibility allowance. And then you look on Hyndburn Borough Council, and I think it's the deputy leader, or is it the leader? I think it's the deputy. He's also the deputy police and crime commissioner for Lancashire. So he's on like 59 grand a year for that employed role, whilst also being the leader, deputy leader of Hyndburn Borough Council, which comes with a bigger special responsibility allowance than the basic county councillor one for helping to run a tiny council compared to Lancashire County Council, which is massive. So you're dealing with dog
Yeah,
poo
yeah.
and fly tipping rather than the bigger upper tier local government issues. And you just think, well, it's your local group who are criticising this, but then when it's like do as I say, not as
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do, because you didn't remove the special responsibility
Well,
allowances.
yeah, those in glass houses should definitely not throw stones. Or if you're throwing stones, just take the glazing out and everybody be as transparent as possible, so that the public who ultimately pay, councillors' wages and pay MPs' wages, we can see exactly where it's going. And transparency is one of the biggest things. And I've always had this discussion where, in terms of tax, whether it be council tax, income tax, VAT, whatever it may be, whatever kind of tax is going, people would not begrudge paying it if they
Yeah.
could see it working, and if they could see that, you know, oh right, well, yeah, my bins on the dot every single week gets emptied. The roads are in absolutely immaculate condition. It doesn't feck up my low profile tires or my suspension on my car. It's absolutely bang on. The fire, the police service, they stop actual crime rather than looking for money left, right, and center. Um, if I ring them, they're there within 5, 10, 15 minutes. The hospitals is not, I broke my nose, which is quite funny. So obviously coming up to this, I play hockey, and I broke my nose, which put me on sort of watch for being on camera, because I was kind of hoping that it wouldn't end up cockeyed and panda eyes. But I went to A&E, and you're talking 10 hours. 10 hours to wait whilst I'm sat there with my nose the size of a frigging squash tomato. And the thing is, obviously the NHS in that sense is funded by national insurance as well. Um, if these things were working efficiently and working better with all this tax money, people wouldn't begrudge it, and I don't think there'd be such an ill feeling towards money
Yeah,
grabbing
all the
government, if that
politicians
makes
who
sense.
get paid for
But the
being in
fact
it.
that they're not. Precisely. And then when you see them getting pay rises for doing a shitter job than what was previously done, it just leaves a really sour taste in your mouth. And then, I speak to friends and family, and what's, the typical, when you have that discussion, because when people say don't talk religion or politics, I don't take any heed of that. That's my two topics that I always generally go to, because I think they're interesting. But that who you're voting for kind of question that comes up, there's no point. Nothing ever changes. And when I think about it, this this next 3 years, we're on the cusp of what, in my opinion, could be the first real change in British politics since the 1600s, which is quite mad when you think about it. And understanding why I say the 1600s is where this two-party system goes all the way back to the 1600s, where the Whigs and the Tories and the Cromwellian wars and so on and so forth. And that's how it sort of came about. The first past the post system was created. And then what's quite hypocritical and quite funny from somebody that obviously reads is Labour calling. I mean, the Labour Party conference, Keir Starmer's speech, where I think every other word was Nigel Farage or Farage, which was really, really hilarious to watch. Um, that was Labour, early 1900s. That was the exact same treatment that they got from the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. Labour were the upstart. Labour were the noisy party. Labour were the ones that weren't worth voting for. And nothing ever has really changed in British politics because of the first past the post system. And when you look at what happened with Nigel Farage when he was at UKIP in 2016, where I think it was 11 or 12% of the national vote he achieved with UKIP, and he ended up getting one seat in Parliament, whereas Conservatives won, I think it was just over double, which was around 30%, and they got over 300 seats. I would like to think, and this is why I got turned on to Zach Polanski. Do you know of any, or is there any plans within Reform to look at proportional representation being installed within the UK if Nigel
I
Farage
think
becomes
it's
prime
the
minister?
old.
Do you know
For
of that?
years, Farage was very for it, and now for the first time, he's going to
Mm,
benefit from the first past the post system. And I think the danger is
yeah.
when you actually look at the polls, there's, I think if you look at it, it's something like Reform are on 34%, and the Conservatives are on something like 16%, which is half of the people polled.
Mm,
And then the other half are made up of
yeah,
Labour,
yeah,
who I would say are very left wing, um, the Green Party,
yeah,
who
yeah.
are so far left, it's like off the scales.
You know what you say that. I don't think they're left or right. I don't think they
And
know where they
if you
are,
look at some of the
and
stuff they've been
especially with
saying, they say they're going to
with-
ban landlords and let people sell heroin and crack, or legalize it at least, legalize the use of it.
it honestly, like I, I got turned on to him because of the proportional representation thing, and I started listening to some of his stuff, and then there was one element where, to me personally, it proved that he was a morally bankrupt politician. Is so I can't remember. It must have been BBC that interviewed him and said, "Would you're a big advocate of proportional representation? Would you go against that?" If it meant Nigel Farage became prime minister, and he said 100% yes, I would. Now, if you're that quick to drop one of your core values because you wouldn't want the will of the British people to be enacted, then you're a very dangerous politician in my book, because there's nothing you wouldn't do to make sure that your vision got seen rather
Yeah,
than the
it's
population's vision.
difficult though because
Um,
the actual consequence. It's easy when you're in a minority party and you get a disproportionate amount of representation to your seats
yeah.
because you're putting all your time into it. It's easy to think, well, this isn't right. It should be more fair, which there's a strong argument for.
Mhm. Of
But then when you're benefiting from
course there is.
um, a disproportionate representation system, you get an appreciation of why it exists. Because if you're going to be the party with the biggest share of the other parties, then you need a majority
Mhm.
of seats to be able to get anything done. If all the politicians have to work with
Yes.
each other, it's a lot of time talking and arguing between people, which it might be constructive if you made them do it, but you only need to look at countries where they've got like five-party coalition systems and things like that to
Yeah,
know
yeah, yeah.
that yeah, it's not
And
that
nothing gets done.
consistent and nothing gets done. So like
And
you can have
I
a
do
whole
understand.
parliamentary term, like a 5 years where they actually do work really well together and get some consensus, and you get a moderate version of what
Yeah.
they all think, like wrapped up into one. But when it's been done here with the Lib Dems and the Tories, that's killed the Lib Dems.
Well, it didn't work.
Yeah, and who
Yeah,
even
it
knows what
didn't
they
work
stand
at
for
all.
now?
And I
Like
think,
Ed Davies, a bit of a joke, and I couldn't name
well,
one of the policies.
no, and I think it's one of those where it's quite telling that they were one of the they were the Whigs. The Whigs evolved into the Liberal Democrats, and they were one of the very first. Well, they were one of the two. There was the Conservatives and the Whigs, or the Tories and the Whigs, and Tories got into Conservatives, and the Whigs turned into Liberal Democrats. It's quite a sort of sad day when that disappears. But at the same time, I'm not naive enough to think that with proportional representation, it works on a national level, in my opinion. However, at a local level, which is where you're at, I know it doesn't work, because ultimately, if for instance, let's for hypothetical sake, say you were a Labour MP and you were wanted in this constituency, but on a proportional representation level, Reform won the proportional representational vote, you might not get a say in Parliament when in fact the people in your constituency wanted you in because you represent them. So I understand at a local level it doesn't necessarily work, but at a national level, I think what it might not, the answer might not be proportional representation. It might be something completely different. But I do think first past the post system limits what I would deem as true democracy, if
Yeah,
that
well,
makes sense. Do you understand what I
true
mean?
democracy is basically, I would say, direct democracy, where we all get to vote on absolutely everything. And you can all put ideas forward, and you all
True.
get
Yeah,
to
yeah,
vote
I
on
agree.
absolutely everything, and the majority, whatever the majority wants, happens. And that's pure democracy. But
Yeah,
then, if you're going to have somebody making decisions and you're just voting for who the somebody is, they pitch their ideas to you, and then it's what area they make decisions covering, because you're voting for an MP, you're voting for your representative of one of 650 people. But then they actually have,
yeah, yeah.
if you're in opposition, you don't really do much other than, so an opposition MP, if they get support, say I stood as an independent for Burnley and I won as an independent and just won
Mhm.
under independent, to actually try and get make bring paper forwards and get it into an act of law, I need consensus.
Mm.
And if the parties freeze me out,
Right,
you need backers to even get it to be debated. So all you could do is comment on stuff. So
right.
you might be able to go to a select committee meeting or something and have a constructive input on something. But unless you do that, in terms of like how legislation's shaped and questioning people and maybe hold them to account a little bit, but you don't see a lot of that. So you're not actually really doing anything.
No.
And then if you're in a minority party, as a party, you might have enough people to suggest stuff, and you might have enough manpower to really start to scrutinise all the different levels of it, because it's hard as just one person doing it. And then when you're in the actual executive who are in power with a majority, it's completely different. So with reform, like we're in every day. I mentioned Joel Tetlow earlier. He worked out a couple of months ago,
Yeah,
he was on something like £4.60 an hour for the amount of time he put in for his allowance. And he's giving up being able to earn a lot more money in what he does. He's giving up his time to go and do
yeah,
that, and then to get criticised by the opposition. But then I ask him to do loads of stuff for me, and he's done even more since then. So he must be on even less of an hourly rate. So him getting put as a pension chair, which is loads of work, he'll probably be on the same low hourly rate because the amount of work that's involved in doing that. But it's like
yeah.
um, there's a lot that goes on, and I think it's politicians' responsibility to be more transparent about it and what they're doing. And there's loads of things I could
Yeah.
discuss about what we're doing and the challenges and why we're doing certain things. And it's the more you do that, the better. So people actually get an insight and they can find you out from these people who are just
That's
like, right, well, that guy is just he's championing a cause, but
a
he's not
job's worth.
actually doing anything. And the more politicians like me actually call it
Yeah,
out
yeah.
without don't necessarily have to make it a personal attack, but say, right,
100%.
this councillor, all he's doing is going around reporting fly tipping. You could get somebody on the council who actually speaks in council meetings and has an input rather than he'll still report fly
Yeah.
tipping at home.
And, and, and action something. Yeah, I mean, you want action, and you want, somebody with a bit, well, common sense and a bit of nous and a bit of somebody that's got a get up and go. And I think what I sort of see, from, well, obviously national level politics, because that's what's sort of covered in the media, is you look at, even from, um, somebody like me that follows politics, quite closely. You look at Angela Rayner when she was deputy. What do you actually do? Because I don't understand. I understand the remit of a deputy prime minister. I understand what that role's there for. Um, but you don't really all I sort of saw from a media perspective, trying to spin it in a positive light is fucking over farmers left, right, etc. Fucking over people that are already hard ass on getting paid, pillaged for tax left, right, and centre. And there was nothing. And obviously, the reason why you see that is because it's a sensationalized story for the media, and that's what gets them views and clicks through. But there's no actual substance behind that. Of if Angela Rayner had come out and said, "Look, the reason why we're doing this," don't get me wrong, I completely disagree with the inheritance tax reforms. There's one thing you never do as a leader of a country is attack your own food supply. It just doesn't make sense. But if there was a legitimate reason there, rather than this 20 billion black hole that's now 50 billion, if there was an actual reason there,
Yeah, a
people
black
can
hole's the
reconcile it,
worst sales pitch ever.
rightly or
Where's your
wrongly.
money going? Into a black hole. Oh, great.
It is
Just say it's for the
exactly.
NHS or something, or one of the things that, whatever the cost driver is. They probably don't want to
Yeah,
say it because a big cost driver is illegal immigration or asylum seeking,
yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
But lie that that's the point. To lie. Lie at that point. If you're going to lie, which you are doing, lie at that point. Don't say black hole. Lie at that point. Don't lie about something else, which is important. Lie, say, oh, it's going to,
Well,
dolphins
it's
in
not. It's
Japan because
not
they're
even
getting murdered.
lying.
Like most,
What you're saying
you
is
know what I
there's
mean?
a black hole is a budget shortfall. So it means in the budget we've allocated this
Yeah,
money and there's overspend, and these are the biggest
and we don't
areas
have it.
driving the overspend. And if we borrow more money,
Mm,
it's increasing the debt levels and making it worse and worse and worse. So we need to raise some money to tide us over and pay off this overspend. This is what the overspend areas are. This is what we're doing about it. And they just got into government and they had a great opportunity to turn around and just level that. And instead they went with black hole. We're gonna
yeah,
we're gonna raise the money from you. And I think they overestimated their own popularity. I think they're so far removed. They've they've
yeah.
never had
Oh,
a proper job. A lot of
that's
them have
yeah.
never had proper jobs. There's no business experience really, and they're all cabinet. The power drunk. It's like taking a selfie of
Mm,
look at me, mum, I'm in
yeah,
Westminster, and they're so far removed and just
yeah.
drunk on their own success of getting there that I think they know they're only going to last one term. And I don't think they really even, I don't think they actually
I think
care what the
I
public
can't
think.
see it.
They're in the little
No,
circles and
I think.
bubbles.
Well, this is what I was saying before with the suicidal politics in terms of the fact that I can't comprehend, I don't understand, and maybe because I'm far removed from that world in terms of the political world. I don't understand as a prime minister how you can stand up on a stage and mandate a digital ID. And don't get me wrong, I truly believe he thinks it might be a good thing. I think he's that naive and that far removed, like you said, that he actually thinks it's a positive thing. But I don't understand. I can't comprehend how you can be the leader of a country, stand on stage, and think that that is going to be
Yeah.
received well
There
by
are there are
your. I don't.
potential
I
benefits.
can't get
The
myself.
stupid thing is there are potential
Oh,
benefits
oh,
to
oh,
it. It is
100%.
just that the data security is not there. It it's very Orwellian to start going down those routes, and the public don't want it.
Hmm.
So there's loads of things that are like there
Well,
could be
the
loads of
thing for
benefits to
me,
doing this, but if people don't want it and they think the disadvantages outweigh the advantages, then you can't do it
the
unless you
cut,
convince people. And trying to convince people of saying it's going to stop illegal working and then not being able to answer how that's going
it's
to
just
happen
bullshit.
is just so weak. They're the weakest government I've ever seen.
Yeah, and it's the whole thing in terms of the fact of um, understanding that you know, I, so he's been to India, hasn't he, recently? And he mentioned in regards to Estonia. Estonia, the digital ID system is a really, good system. Um, but in Estonia, it was taken up voluntarily.
Well, we say good sister in India. There's
And then
something
he was
like
taught,
seven. There's been something like 700 million personal details of Indian people on the dark web for like
well,
the last few years, hasn't there?
yeah. I mean, if you take out the data breaches, which is obviously a big concern, I understand, like you mentioned, there is positives to it. But the biggest thing for me, like we were talking about Shabnam mentioning about mass civil disobedience and understanding that little bit of a snippet of language as being like a very, like you said, Orwellian concept. When he's gone and spoke in India about digital ID and mentioned Estonia in India, the biggest thing that I picked up on is in both them countries, it was voluntarily taken up. It wasn't mandated. It wasn't forced upon the population. It was, it was offered to the population, and people could take it up or not take it up. It was completely up to them. This is the difference where you try and mandate it, and I don't know whether you've got children, but I know with my daughter, if you tell her to do something, you need to go and clean your room. I'm not doing that. Whereas if you kind of if I probably left her to it and said, look, if you clean your room, we'll maybe go out for tea. She'd probably go and
Ask
do
or
it off her own
incentivize or
accord.
nudge into it is a far more intelligent way to get what you want if
Exactly.
that is what they want. And going back to
Yes,
that,
and it doesn't
it's
make sense.
David Cameron did a lot of nudge theory, so they try and nudge the public down the route that they
Mm,
want. But I think it all fundamentally comes back
yes.
to this sort of, like I said, with the refugee films, it's social engineering and they view the public as a great
Yes.
inconvenience to their plans. They know better. The public don't understand. It's not on them to speak to the public and have a two-way
Mm,
conversation and to listen to the public and what the public think. It's they know best. They need to manipulate or lie to get you to do what you want. And if you think about people you've met in your
yeah.
life who behave like that, you it's generally like the most narcissistic, worst sort of people that you
Yeah.
know who actually come across. And I remember someone said to me once, "We'd get along fine if you were just compliant." And I thought, we are never going to get along then. Like there is no way around this. Is that if that is what you actually think? When there was no
If
when
you
there
were
was no
just
conflict or
compliant,
disagreement, we got along fine. When we disagreed over things,
yeah,
it was if you were the attitude of like, I don't want a debate over it, you just need to comply with what I think. And when people have that attitude,
yeah,
you won't be able to convince somebody else to do something. You can only lie or manipulate for so long until they wake up for it. And it is basically like abuse to keep somebody. And we've been in this abusive
well, it
relationship with our
is
government for so long, with successive governments
for a
where
long
it's how can I
time.
lie or manipulate?
Mm.
And that's the difference with reform, I
Well,
think, is we
it's
don't think how can we lie or manipulate. We
yeah.
just think how can we level with people of what's actually going on. So we're going to have to make loads of tough decisions soon, and it's
So I
like we
think
need to communicate why we're doing it, not how can we lie to people and blame somebody else for it.
yes. Well, this is one of the points that I sort of I jotted down and I wanted to discuss with you. As my brain works at 6,000 miles an hour with 26 guests that are already booked in, the left, right, and centre, and so I think, oh, that'd be a good question for Tom. Oh, that'd be good for Tom, and then oh, that'd be good for so and so. Um, when you look at, I don't think based on what we're told through the media, I'm a wholehearted believer that I don't think Nigel Farage is racist. I don't think he's a bigot. I don't think he's a fascist. I don't think he's a Nazi. I think he's a very real person in terms of who If I met Nigel Farage in a pub in Britain somewhere, um, I wouldn't be surprised if that makes sense. But these words, like we discussed before we started, of racist, Nazi, bigot, fascist, that get thrown around willy nilly, um, the media don't do well. They do a good enough job of stirring up all this civil unrest. We saw it with the Kingdom rally. We've seen it with the Palestine protests, and the media have a big part to play in that. Um, Regardless of what side, I had this discussion yesterday evening, and the gentleman that I was discussing was a big supporter of Israel, and I'm like, look, I don't like either side. I'm not siding with either of them because I don't know enough about. I know quite a lot more than the average person, but I still don't know enough about to pick any side whatsoever. Um, and I think in terms of British politics, where my concern is nigh on a media storm and something terrible happening where Nigel Farage turns out to be a reptilian in disguise or something along those lines. The likelihood is he's going to be the next prime minister at this rate. Now, when he does take power, this civil discourse doesn't stop. It doesn't just stop overnight because the person that they wanted in power is now in power, or the person that they didn't want in power is now in power. How do you think they rein that back in? And do you think it can, in this next 3 years, go too far to the point where my concern is, in times of civil unrest and potential danger, martial law, if it does go that far, because that's the ultimate end of this sort of goal. There's no election held,
I think the only
and it's
way.
suspended. This episode is sponsored by the Pendle Mushroom Company, pioneers in the world of functional fungi. They grow, harvest, and dual extract every mushroom right here in the UK, from lion's mane to cordyceps, for maximum purity, potency, and sustainability. Whether you're looking to boost focus, energy, or overall well-being, their tinctures are the real deal. No imported powders, no fillers, just science-backed mushrooms done right. And because you're part of the Cut the Shit community, you can get 10% off all tinctures with the code CTS10 at pendlemushroomco.com. That's CTS10 for 10% off. Unlock the power of nature with the Pendle Mushroom Company.
The things will improve in that sense is if we have a successful country, a successfully run country, and the only way to get there is it's going to be really bumpy, because a lot of people say to
Mm.
me, reform are the last hope. Like, you are the last hope that we've got. And the only light at the end of the tunnel that they see is reform getting in. And they feel like the country is doomed. And a lot of the sentiment is sooner the better. I feel like it's pretty much already too late and we're going down all these paths that we've been going down for a long time. It's already getting to the point where it's too late. And people have a wide range of reasons
Mm.
and multiple reasons feed into why they feel like that. If Farage gets in, there'll be so much backlash because, like I said earlier, when they poll people,
Yeah,
you're still only talking 50% of the country, and as much as you try and govern for everybody, it'll sell because it's contentious and anything to do with reform and this new party coming in and Nigel
of
Farage and
course
all
it
the
is.
individuals involved. Um, the media will drum it up. I think the biggest dictator of how well we do will be market confidence, which I think we're going to see
Hmm.
swing heavily towards reform because the OBR forecasts for growth are very weak. Uh, Labour aren't doing a good job at managing the economy. I think after the November budget, they'll lose all public confidence and things will just spiral from there. And I think that, or IMF involvement, will be what finishes them off. So I think the markets will get confidence in
Mm.
reform. And if you have that market confidence, you've only got the civil confidence to focus on
Yeah,
and the decisions that you make moving forwards. Whereas if you don't have the market confidence, that could be ruinous. But I think the media will drum it up a lot. You've then got a period where if you can navigate that and run the country and actually start to improve things, or at least be fully transparent about what you're doing, what you found, what you're doing to solve the problems. I think it's a bit easier nationally, if anything, to
yeah,
sort of stop doing um, if we leave the ECHR, pull out of various conventions
yeah,
and repeal certain laws, it's a lot easier to take stronger action against illegal immigration. You can start combating the mass migration that's causing a lot of issues. You can cut off a lot of the overseas spending and then start to look at the other things, which is more efficiency based and process based and repealing laws or rewriting legislation to make it better. And if you're transparent with the public about what you're doing in
Yeah.
that, people do think it starts to get better. Then it's keeping people
Yeah,
with
well, I
you.
think the
Yeah, what they'll
transparency will
go
be
for us
key.
for is probably the
Yeah.
deportations, because if you look at what Trump's doing in America with ICE, he's deporting people at scale, and
Now, yeah, and it was funny. I was listening to Joe Rogan and his episode with Duncan Trussell, and he mentioned about one of the ICE commanders had an interview, and he was saying, because obviously there's a big uproar of they're deporting people that have been there for 20 years and have a family there, and they are a productive member of society. However, they did enter the country illegally, and blah 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 blah. And you know what? From a human perspective, an empathetic perspective, it doesn't sit right with me. When something like that happens, and I don't think it'd sit right with 95% of people in this country either. However, the ICE commander, whatever his name was, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he mentioned, look, if we don't do this, it's a loophole that the gangs and the trafficking gangs will exploit at some stage. If we don't get rid of every single person that came into this country illegally, it shows that there's a chink in our armor, so to speak, and it will be exploited somehow. And it does make sense now from a piece of paper and legislation perspective. It's hard to argue that. However, from a humanity and empathetic perspective, I kind of get it. And somebody said to me the other week, like, um, and I'm sure you'll have heard it. All reform voters are racist, and I paused and I went, no, you need to correct that. I said, and I don't think either statement is true, but not all reform voters are racist. You might get a little bit better traction if you said all racists are reform voters. Now that's a slight,
I'd
different
strongly
turn,
disagree with
but
that, because if you look at some of the views
I
within
disagree with. Yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah.
foreign nationals in this country from various backgrounds, you look at something like the Indian
Hmm.
caste system. It depends, how do you
Yeah.
define racism? Because the caste system is very problematic
Well,
with the
it's
definition of
subjective.
racism. By the way that we define it in this country,
Hmm.
the caste system is racist. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know
yeah.
the statistics, but I would imagine that a lot of people from India vote for Labour. I don't know whether it's the majority or the
Oh, 100%.
minority. So then you've got all these different nuances to it, and I think a lot of there's a lot of people from all different nationalities who have problematic views towards either other skin colours or religions or things like
Hmm.
that. And sometimes they're not what I'd call racist. And it's like the nation state, by definition, has to be racist, because you can't have a nation state without
Hmm.
discriminating in some way. You need to
Without,
prioritize your
yeah,
own
yeah, yeah.
state, so you're discriminating against people from other states. So then,
And it's not inherently racist in itself because you're not
yeah,
doing it to be racist, but in its existence, it's technically you can argue that it
but what is a
is
race?
inherently
Because
racist,
we
but
use
it's not.
racist, and
But
people
what is?
usually
Yeah,
link
exactly.
race to skin color, but then it's very entwined with nationality,
Hmm.
and it's such a loose term. It's just
Yes.
basically a term of abuse, which is so loosely defined that you can call it anybody, and it's shut people up for a long time. And when you actually drill down people into it, and you go,
Yes.
right, okay, Afghanis, and people would say, oh well, brown skin and Islam, and they're probably the two bigger factors, other than the nationality. But there's
Yeah. Yeah.
different
Yeah.
religions. I don't know what it's like now under the Taliban, but there were
Yes.
historically different religions. Same in Pakistan. There's Christians in Pakistan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then there's people with
Yeah.
different skin
Sikhs,
colours.
Hindus,
There's
Muslims. Yeah.
very
Yeah.
pale skinned ginger Pakistanis in an area of Pakistan. And it's like,
Yeah.
is it nationality ist rather than racist? It's
I
so
get you.
problematic for me.
Or is it the? Yeah, I think I may. In terms of correcting the person when he said that. It's more of the fact of I think that is generally from a non-reform voter's perspective. So maybe the Labour, Conservative, Green Party, whatever they may be, that might be general public opinion, and based on it's stoked by media 100%. I've known people that have voted reform, and I know Asian people and immigrants that are talking about voting reform. One of my friends who I mentioned is absolutely fuming at the whole illegal immigration
I know a lot of people are the same. Yeah.
policies, and the fact that he had to come. Yeah, he's 100% hook, line, and sinker for reform. So I think maybe my question is, how do you battle that public opinion, really? And maybe through transparency, like we've discussed, is probably one of the best ways to do it. And maybe through acknowledgement of, yeah, there will be, like there is, like you've said, in every single party, there will be the bad apples that vote for the party that you can't stop because they're part of society. But at the same time, how do you tar you can't then tar the rest of your voter pool with that brush based on the fact um, one bad apple has voted for reform or one bad apple has voted for conservatives. And I suppose it's never been an issue before in British politics because I don't think there's ever been a more
I, th-
polarizing time,
I think what we're
especially on
doing
issues of
is the
race.
way to combat it, which we've got Zia Youssef, who's a former party chairman, who's
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
very prominent,
Second
yeah,
generation
family
immigrant.
from
Yeah,
Sri Lanka. And nobody is saying,
yeah.
let's deport him or his family. If you look at the actual
No.
policies, it's reversing the recent wave of immigration and people
Hmm.
who haven't got indefinite right to remain, people who are already here illegally, which Pew Research estimated in 2017 there are about 700,000 people already here illegally. And we know it shot up in terms of people coming here on the boats, and that's just the people who are declaring themselves that are on those stats. So I would guess that there's
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
around
yeah.
1 million people here
It's at
illegally,
least double. Yeah,
undocumented.
yeah.
So it's like if you're addressing those people, and it's going to take time to start deporting those people and finding them and um, going for
Hmm.
towards and assessing on a sort of what does the country need and how have you behaved basis the people who have come here via legal routes more recently. There's loads of abuse of care and work
Hmm.
visas, student visas of people who just come and stay. I get things reported to me all the
Stay beyond.
time of
Yeah,
people on care or work visas, and they come and then they stop working very quickly. They basically pay somebody to get the visa, come over, work for them very briefly. They get a
mm.
government grant in care for employing someone from overseas, and then they stop working for them. And because they are supposed to report to them that they're still working for them, and they just nothing's going to happen if they don't play ball because the deportation side isn't there. And it comes back
Yeah,
to
yeah.
what you said of if the chinks in the armor, it'll get abused. And the same is true for every area of law. Like if the chinks in the armor, it's not a proper deterrent. So I think it's going about it in a professional
Yes.
way without
Well,
saying,
that's
without giving in to this sort of more far right cry of like, oh, just
yes.
deport everybody. It should only be white British people and all these sort of
Yeah.
things that
Well,
you hear on the extreme end.
I
We've kept
think
them
any,
out of the party.
yeah, I think anybody with half a brain understands that that's not the way to do it, and I don't think anybody with any modicum of intelligence thinks that that is what reform are going to do in terms because you wouldn't have a country to run. Let's face it that way, because the NHS would crumble, the public transport system would crumble, the construction institutions would absolutely capitulate. So I don't think that's necessarily, like I said, anybody with a modicum of intelligence thinks
I
that's going
think
to
a lot of
happen.
people on the other side though
I
actually
think,
think that's what a lot of people on the reform side
yeah,
think, and they're just dressing it up as something else. I think there is a big group of
yeah, yeah.
people who think that that's what they're dealing with. For example, one of the county councillors, John Potter, who's a Lib Dem, he referred
Mm.
to us as like the BNP in a full council meeting, just like the latest iteration of the
Yeah. Well,
BNP.
that was
And that is the line for me. If he basically sees it as you are the sort of group of people who want those sort of things that I referenced earlier, and you're just dressing it up as something
yeah.
different now, and it's really dangerous that you've got all this power, and that couldn't be further from the truth when you look at
No. Well, I think the fact of the matter. So, what's happened in the United States? I think that's the worry that would happen here, and I think people are realizing in terms of the Trump. And don't get me wrong, he got elected on that. That was one of his mandates. He wanted to secure the borders, deport illegal aliens, and he is doing it. And he did that. And in the last stint as president, he got elected on building the wall. He built the fucking thing. Like, he did what he said he was going to do, which I think is why he became a very uh, populist president. And I think the concern from a without blowing smoke up my own backside, from a semi-intellectual person, is it it has to be done the right way like you've said, in terms of assessing and analyzing and making sure that we're not just blanket deporting everybody left, right, and centre that we don't think belongs, which ultimately turns into a fascist nationalist state, which I've already said I don't believe it would be. But it's then making, like you said, the transparency of making sure that the public understand that this is the way that it's going to happen, and maybe screaming that from the rooftops that it becomes so unignorable to and the volume of it becomes louder than what the Conservatives, what Labour are saying, what Lib Dems are saying, what Independents are saying. And it's like, well, no, this is the plan laid out, transparent. Everybody can see it. Everybody can understand what we're going to do, rather than buying into the propaganda of mainstream media and
yeah.
politicians and
With Reform, their
mudslinging.
PR nationally and the way they whip up the national debate, they've had both parties on the ropes and have done what many people
Oh,
considered
yeah,
impossible, which is breaking the two-party system. To the point where everybody's saying that
yeah,
with confidence before we've even had a general election. There's not many people like it's basically most people agree Nigel Farage is going to be
like you said,
yeah
it's carrying the
Nigel
bars.
Farage is going to
Yeah,
be the next prime minister. I think they're so good at that nationally, whilst it's a change actually being in power and the focus is on you. It's easier to shout about stuff in opposition. Actually
yes,
implementing those things, whilst it will be a challenge, is less of a switch than, say, local government. And I think one of the things that we need to improve on massively in local government, because it's a lot more localised, and you're talking about local media outlets, and national media outlets will
hmm
only cover certain things. Um, it's a lot harder to control that, and because a lot of the county councillors who've taken over are all busy, because if you're a backbencher who doesn't have any or many extra responsibilities, it's quite likely that you're working. A lot of people work full time and do it as an extra thing.
yeah,
If
yeah.
you've actually got a position, there's a lot of people who've given up. Um, I'd say most people off the top of my head have given up earning a lot more money doing other things to do this. Are you talking younger or older
Yeah.
people who could be earning far more money doing something else? I know our lead that applies to me, that applies to our leader, Stephen, Joel Tetlow, as I mentioned earlier.
Mm.
It's like you can earn far more doing something else, but you're doing this because you care. But then you're that wrapped
Yeah,
up
yeah,
trying to get things done quickly as possible, and you need to understand it all to start with and
yeah,
hit the
yeah.
ground running. And we only had two people out of 53 who were former county councillors, and you're going into it, and there's not
hmm
that many new people on the opposition. In fact, there's maybe only two or three people in the whole opposition that I can think of off the top of my head. I might be wrong on that. who weren't previously county councillors. So you're going into a system where they know
Mhm.
it, they're out to get you, and you need to learn it all and run it.
Yeah,
There's not been, it's an afterthought. And because we're not minded like the traditional politicians, where they're always thinking of PR above all else, I think we've
yeah,
been a
yeah,
bit, we've sort of fallen into it where it's easy for the media to start bashing us. And I thought it would be done a lot more fairly,
yeah,
where, for example, the Burnley Express. You'd think having such a historic new party coming in, taking all the county council seats and looking like being the Prime Minister, they might want to do like you're doing now, having an open chat with somebody and let the
yeah.
public know what they're dealing with.
This,
There's no question of
yeah,
doing anything like that.
which is it's so it's like you said, like I know there's a lot of sort of Orwellian comments and phrases and labeling being thrown around, but it is such a strange concept that as a news outlet, whether it be a paper, magazine, media outlet, online, whatever, that's your fucking job. Your job is to explore, you know, if a new political party came to power, your job is to right. Well, what are these guys all about? What are you doing? Blah blah. Like an expose, editorial, whatever it may be. And the fact that on a national level and like you've mentioned at a local level, that's not actually happening. It's such a really strange societal
Yeah,
sort of
and to be
place to
fair to
be in.
them,
Like,
it's not necessarily the journalist's fault or the editor's fault. It's
no,
the way they operate. So they have, I think we've got four across Lancashire, local local democracy reporting service journalists who are paid by the BBC, who also work for other media outlets. And there's probably about three of the bigger media outlets who own a lot of the other local papers. So like the who owns the Lancashire Telegraph will also own
so
another
it's like a
one.
mafia.
Well, they've
Yeah, yeah,
they cull a lot of the resources for local journalism when people stop buying papers and they didn't get the same advertising revenue in your local paper and people going and buying it. So because of that, the resources are stripped. So they rely on the local democracy reporting services for politics, articles, and they're covering quite a wide area. Yeah, so
sensationalize.
and then if they are biased or the editor's biased, even if they write something that's like a pro-reform piece, they won't necessarily get published as well. So that's another factor. But because it's like
Yeah,
bare
yeah,
bones, I think the other parties are a lot more experienced and because they've known these people for a long time as well. And they think in terms of PR,
yeah.
they'll push the story out there and they've got like a little column. So the Burnley Express does a column for Oliver Ryan and Councillor Anwar is the Burnley Borough
Mm.
Council leader. The, I've never seen a
Yeah,
Lancashire
yeah,
County
yeah.
Councillor's column, and you could alternate it between the
No,
councillors
but
and let them each write a piece. And I think because it's Lancashire based, there's a big gap with it. But there's not a Lancashire Telegraph leader of Lancashire County Council column either. And I know
no,
that's old news
it's a
now. There's so
strange.
many
Yeah,
media outlets. It's like the stuff that we could get in the national media, but the bonds issue, for example, is absolutely scandalous.
yeah. I mean, you mentioned was it 350
Yeah. So they
million
bought
quid?
in the last Conservative administration when they were the majority group. Lancashire County Council have pursued buying over £500 million worth of bonds, and they've lost 350 million in value, and that puts the council in a position where you've got to declare the lost value on your balance sheet. And the only reason that doesn't bankrupt the council is because the government let you do something called statutory override, which means you don't have to declare it on your balance sheet. So you declare it, sorry, but it's not on the balance sheet due to statutory override. Yeah.
But it's not on the balance
So,
sheet.
but
Yeah,
that still
yeah.
puts you in a position
Which
where you've got £500 million plus tied up, and you can't sell it without incurring that massive loss. And you're reliant on statutory
that loss.
override
Yeah.
being
Well,
extended each year, which isn't guaranteed.
so So obviously you'll know, or you might not know, how's that allowed to happen? So ultimately, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've done my fair share of forex trading and I understand sort of a little bit about it. In terms of bonds, they're basically, in essence, the gold standard, and it's all the price of bonds is dictated by the price of gold within reason. It's all related. So how is somebody allowed without? Because in essence, it's, for those that don't know, it's gambling with taxpayers' money. Then, because regardless of I think forex trading is classed as spot betting in this country. Um, so it's a form of gambling. So in essence, from my understanding of it, what they've done is they've gambled with the public's money and, have fucking lost
Yeah.
big time.
I'd,
And
every county council's got to do. You don't necessarily have to have investments, but you have to have a sort of treasury management strategy. You've got like capital or revenue budget,
mhm.
reserves. It's not the easiest thing to manage in terms. It's like a massive business, 2.3 billion
No,
gross turnover. So you're dealing with a big business with these different pots of money, some of which are like ring fenced by the government,
yeah,
some of which you're free on. So rather than having that money in reserves, or it could have been in the capital budget, they invest it, and it's like, well, we'll get a better return than holding that money in the bank. And rather than spending it on something, we'll put it where it's safe, and that'll help our cash flow
mm,
out by getting the regular income from
yeah.
it, and we'll tie that money up. And they didn't anticipate it becomes illiquid if it drops loads in value. But with the big problem with the previous
Well, yeah.
administration was none of them have actually admitted they knew about it. And you have an audit risk and governance.
Like, faulty
Yeah,
towers. I know
exactly.
nothing.
Like Manuel. You have an audit risk and governance committee meeting every couple of months. And in these committee meetings, in all committees, you get these hundreds of pages of report. And within that report, like covering a vast range of things to do with auditing the council and the potential risks and governance issues and things like that, is treasury management and investments. And they've increased the process was you only need the officers to sign off on actually buying the bonds. So they give too much free license to the director of investments to basically, if he wanted to do a fire sale of them all and invest them on something else, as long as it was in line with the strategy that they'd signed off on, he had complete free
Yeah,
license to
yeah.
do it. But
Which is
they
it's
changed it
absolutely
after this
bonkers.
loss, which is very telling, to say it then needs sign off by cabinet, which
Well,
is the politicians. So, despite saying that none of them knew anything, the process got changed to stop it from happening right before we took
so
over.
somebody
So,
knew.
at least somebody knew, but who knew?
Which
We don't know. It could have been just one of them found out, and
and
it was just the leader who found out, and he's not told anyone else. But they're not being very transparent, I think, about that to say, you know what, this is a big issue. This is
which
exactly what happened, and we owe it to the public to square it with them. They're just trying to downplay it and say, oh, well, it's not a loss if you don't sell them.
and the problem is, or the and this is, we're looking at it, or you're looking at it from a Lancashire County Council perspective. There's a hell of a lot more councils across the country, and if this has happened in Lancashire County Council, the likelihood that it may have happened in other councils may be quite, or the way I would look at it, it may be quite high. Even if it's 10% of councils, that's quite a lot of money. Probably over £1 billion that have been lost through money mismanagement. When you look at, you know, Rachel Reeves or whoever it may be talking about growing the economy, and no matter what Starmer says, I don't believe him. But we're here for working class people and for the entrepreneurs and this, that, the other. Now that £1 billion, if you use that as um, a loan set up to fund small businesses to grow, which in turn grows the economy, which in turn, you look at. So one of my friends that I used to train at the gym with, Moshe Easter, who's from Blackburn Euro Garages. I never never knew who Moshe was. I trained with him for quite some time, until we left the gym one day, and he ended up getting into his Rolls Royce, and I kind of discovered who he was. But he started with one petrol station, and now he owns
They
Asda,
took over
Euro
the dad's
garages,
garage or something, I
multi-billionaire.
believe, didn't they?
Yeah, that was it. And it's literally, the day that I found out who he was, the week before he just signed a £350 million deal with Starbucks and it was like so unassuming, so humble, amazing person, really lovely. Now, it wouldn't take 10% of that money to come in at ground zero from a governmental level to get gains back on that, which puts back into the public, puts public's faith back in government that they are in with, they're in service of the people. But instead, gambling with money and losing it in essence on the stock market through buying bonds it's just it's negligence at national level. And like if reform hadn't have come along, we probably
Yeah,
wouldn't
and
know about it.
it's not had any media coverage, and it's absolutely scandalous that it's been allowed to happen.
No.
And it is a treasury management tool. LCC also issued a bond in 2020, their own bond of 350 million, which they then have to pay returns on, so many percent every quarter, every 6 months. I think
Mm.
it was twice a year on that, and then they have to pay back like the original purchase value or a set rate at the end of it, which has just been paid off in March this
Yeah.
year. So not only have they said we want 350 million, which various councils and other organisations have bought this bond and they've had 350 million, they've then had to pay back more than 350 million for that in total because that's
And then
essentially
it's not
an
worth that.
instrument to borrow money. No, that's our bond. They've then gone and bought bonds as well. So
Mm.
we've raised money from the
On
bonds
top of that,
market, which has now been paid
oh,
back, and we couldn't refinance that because the market's so bad. But then we're tied up in these. Some of them don't mature, these bonds, until I'm like 120 plus. Uh,
so they're not like the
No,
10,
they're
20,
the
50.
really long term
Wow.
ones, some of them, and they've lost value, and now we're just stuck in that situation unless the market recovers, which it showed no sign of doing in the last 2 years since they plummeted in value. And we're just tied, and
Yeah,
like we're having to make
I don't see
250
it.
million of
Don't see it
savings
happening.
over the next few years about that. So 250. Yeah, and
Just
bear in
because of
mind
that.
that costs are also rising in that time, so that could even go higher. We don't know how much we're going to get from the government,
Hmm.
so
Plus inflation. Yeah, add inflation into that mix. It becomes
yeah.
even
So
more of
costs
a
are going,
bleak
and
outlook.
everybody expects with inflation to get more money, and with 13,500 staff who are
Mm.
employed by LCC, and I think there's over 30,000 on the payroll because teachers and stuff are through the payroll as well, and everybody's going to want a pay
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
rise because costs are going up. If Labour's economic situation continues and the country's sort of debt situation continues and all these different things that are contributing to it. And it's absolutely scandalous that county councils have uh, have lost so much money whilst having to make so many savings, and all you hear about in the
Yeah.
media is petty things. And all you
Nigel
hear
Farage
about
is a
from the
racist.
opposition is trying to downplay it
Yeah.
because taking it seriously helps reform out. Whereas all we're really bothered about is just saying, look, this is what we've found so far. And if you keep criticising us about like, oh, you're going in and finding waste and stuff, well, there's 350 million there. There's for a
It's that.
start.
I mean, it's just it, and it's like we were saying before. If that's happening at local level, then rightly or wrongly, but probably rightly, you can imagine that's happening at a much grander
Yeah.
scale at a higher level. Um, and the thing for me is the fact that you know I must admit out of who were the options before reform came along, I wouldn't trust any of them to run a bath. Never mind a country. And the fact that well, you look at Tony Blair. Tony Blair going into prime minister. He's now a multi-millionaire. And then people mention about Rishi Sunak. However, he was a millionaire before he became prime minister to an extent, and he kind of became prime minister by default. Same as Gordon Brown did. Same as Boris Johnson did. Oh no, Theresa May. Sorry, and Liz Truss. There's another one. But in terms of, you know, it's going to be a very difficult job for anybody as a Reform Party member or a Reform politician, councillor, PM, to regain that trust from the public based on the fact that all they've had for the past fucking God knows how long. It's been what
The
we've
easy
just
thing,
explored and
though, it is
described.
really easy. You just be honest. It's like the truth shall set you free. I
Yeah,
think that's a
true,
quote from the Bible. But you just need to be honest. So
true.
with
No,
stuff
you're
like
right.
this, it's like,
But it's a foreign concept for a politician. Well, it seems when you talk politics, truth doesn't come into the
yeah,
equation quite a lot of the time. But you are right. You are bang on the money. Is the fact that the truth shall set you free, to the point where people, you know, I've always found it, with when I've managed staff and so on and so forth, is when people are treated like children, they'll behave like children. When, if you treat the public as um, ignorant to the fact, then that's where resentment will grow, and that's where disillusionment and being disconnected from politics will happen. If you're truthful with them, that's automatically engaging to anybody. Anybody will listen to somebody being authentic and truthful. And I think, yeah, I mean, I will be surprised if it happens, and that's only because of my pure distrust of sort of British politics that has been sort of ingrained into me. But it would be awesome to see that a reform government that would be open book with the British public, and understand that it's a government that works for the people, not
yeah.
again,
I think
not the people that work
that's
for the
why they
government.
got so popular. And it's just a case
Mm,
of transitioning that when you get into power, as we found in local councils, although it's very different because it was like the national popularity got us into councils more than any sort of local campaign in these areas.
yes.
So whilst people did work hard and delivered leaflets and things like that, if it wasn't for the national thing, people wouldn't have voted reform. If it was just some independent bottom up movement, it was very top down. The It's just
Yeah.
transitioning it to being able to be transparent and being very clear to say, look, we've come in, this is what we found, this is what we're going to do. We're trying to find out as
Yeah.
much information as possible and share it with the public and let them know why we're making these decisions. And this is the general direction that we want to go in. And financially, it's the same in a council as it is in the country, or it will be in a house or in a business.
Yeah.
If you borrow money, which they're all in massive debt because we've been doing this for ages, if you borrow money and get car
Yeah.
finance or something to go and get a car, it's because you need a car to go to work to earn more money to pay it off. And eventually you think you will benefit more from doing that and you'll have some better quality of
Yep.
life and there'll
Well,
be
it's
an
got to be
overall
worth it. Yeah.
benefit to it. And what we're actually doing is just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing to maintain services and with no way of paying all that money back. And it's basically borrowing from the next
Well, I think
generation, and it just needs someone to go in and be honest and say, we want to start actually sorting this out and stop all this wasteful spending. We don't owe anything to other countries in the sense that like you don't have a right to come over here and
yeah.
uh you need to earn something like 43 grand, I think it is the last stat that I saw, to actually contribute to the system. And it's like if you're not on that
Yeah.
threshold, but there's still a massive risk. If you come
You.
over here and earn
You.
43 grand,
Yeah.
if something happens to you, we're at a loss already. So yeah,
Well, yeah. Straight off the bat, and I think, like you've mentioned, in terms of waste at at a national level. Like you look at the systems and structures that we have in place, whether that be energy grids, energy. Let's take that for example, because when I found this out, it absolutely shocked me. But we're putting up wind farms and offshore wind farms left, right, and centre, which are awful for the environment to start with. But the government actually pays. I think the energy companies make more from the government paying them to switch them off because the grid and the infrastructure can't handle the electricity that they would make than they would if they actually switched them on and created the electricity. Now, that is not known at a sort of public level. People think, oh, windmills, green energy. Oh, yeah, it's great for the environment. And oh, yeah, we're putting up more because it'll bring our energy costs down. When in fact, they're actually paying them, I think it was over £200 billion a year to
There's
switch
an
the fuckers
Octopus Energy
off,
website that
which
tracks it, actually. They've set up a website to track it. So that's an energy company
it,
being transparent about it.
it's mad. Which is great, but like you said, in terms of being run for profit, if I owned an energy company, I'd be like, yeah, fucking pay me to switch them off. Like it extends the life of my windmill, and I'm getting more money if you pay me. You can't blame the energy companies; it's pure
Yeah, the
government
energy
inefficiency.
market and grid
Um,
has been botched for so long. I've done quite a bit of work in
yes,
that industry, so I know a fair bit about it. And it's been that poorly managed for so long. And basically, we don't. A lot of the push for smart meters was because not only does it improve things for suppliers with knowing how much you've used so they can bill you accurately and there's not all that messing about, knowing how much you're
yeah,
using
yeah, yeah,
means we know how much to generate. You can predict it. So unless there's a big change or there's a World Cup on
yeah,
or
yeah.
something's happening, they know how much. Yeah,
You've got a
you know
base
how
level.
much people are using, you know how much to generate. Because we don't know that, we massively overproduce to avoid blackouts. Because the consequence of more demand than supply is a
It's
blackout. So in
very
these
bad.
countries where you get blackouts, that's the like, put it in very simple terms, if you know what I mean. Where you get these countries with power outages and things like that, it's because you don't generate enough. And then beyond that, it
Enough.
doesn't matter who your energy supplier is. It's not British Gas's electricity coming through your door. It's all the same stuff.
Yeah,
They're just billing you, but they work with the grid and the distributors and things like that to basically purchase from markets that they access that you don't access as a domestic home user to say,
yeah, yeah,
well,
yeah, yeah.
we've got this many customers in this distribution area, so we'll pay for that much energy, and then a shipper in gas puts that in, or like, and then you've got all the energy generators. It's that complex of a market, and it's not had people in the government who truly understand it in policy. And we've just heard this, let's switch to
Which is
renewable generation to save the planet, and us switching to renewable generation isn't going to save the planet. And it's just got worse and worse and worse because these renewable technologies weren't well known about enough in terms of what the impact's going to be
true.
on the grid, and it's not been planned properly.
Well, it's like, so I think, like when Farage, quite rightly, in my opinion, says scrap net zero, which I think is 100% a money making scam. The whole thing with electric cars. I have to sort of have this discussion every time I say and speak about it, is the fact that where do you think the electric comes from to power the car? Because it just doesn't come out of it comes from burning burning fossil fuels at a higher rate than what a petrol or diesel car would anyway. So you're not actually saving the planet. You're just adding another step in that'll make somebody else rich and car companies richer because obviously they're selling new cars and this, that, the other. But I think when Farage is talking about scrap net zero, I think it would be very beneficial to sort of highlight the fact that the reason is because it's a pointless endeavor, because the grids and the systems and for instance, if everybody had an electric car tomorrow, nobody would be going anywhere because there's no grid or system in place to charge all them cars. It wouldn't work. So the 2030, was it 2030, was that the target? to scrap diesel cars by 2030 and everybody convert to electric and this, that, the other. It's just, it's not the fact that, we don't acknowledge that looking after the environment is important. It's the fact that it's an impossibility without sorting out the grid and sorting out the systems in place behind the shiny
Yeah,
new
that's it.
windmills, wave generators, and cars. If you haven't got that foundation correctly, another northern
Yeah,
colloquialism, you're
it's
pissing in the
exactly
wind.
that. And the big unspoken thing is we are not going to make a blind bit of difference when you look at the amount that the developing economies in the world.
Well, the global emissions have
Well,
gone up
yeah, and
60%.
in
Yeah.
switching it over to, even if we switch it over to renewables, a lot of the carbon impact is offshored. So it's just another country doing it anyway to
Yes.
produce a solar panel in
Yeah. It
another
doesn't. It
country and
doesn't mean
everything.
anything.
We've invested a lot in these technologies, in the research and development of them, and then the production of this stuff, like batteries, because our manufacturing is so poor in this country and we're priced out. They've
Hmm.
taken our ideas, they earn a lot of profit selling us a battery or a solar panel or windmills or whatever it may be, or they've got the resources that we rely on.
Yeah.
You always have to work with other countries in some
Yeah.
way, but we've not done it in a way where
Of
it's
course.
been smart and you think, oh yeah, you can see what you're doing there. They've been really smart about how they. It's just based on the fact of like save the planet and we'll lead in the example of doing so. And
Hmm.
everyone else is taking
It's
advantage of us.
it's that
Yeah.
blind. Well, it's the blind leading the blind in terms of the fact that a lot of from my outside looking in, and I'm open to people commenting and making comments on it through my ignorance. Is the fact that I look at it and think a lot of countries' green policies are made from the thought process of a little 12-year-old Swedish girl called Greta Thunberg, because she called out all world leaders, how dare you. Like, no, no, that's not a way to set your policy. A way to set your policy is actually look at systems and infrastructure and do it logically, and make sure that, yes, if electric cars, great idea, but we don't have the systems in place. So why don't we say by 2030 we're going to have upgrade every single part of the grid in the UK, make sure that when that does happen, we're one of the very few countries that has the infrastructure in place, so we can make the change overnight
Yeah.
rather
And if
than
you
a
if you
gradual
want clean
change.
energy and
Um,
electric cars and things like that, you need to look at the wider picture, like you said, of all these different factors, how you can
yes,
practically achieve it in a way that's actually economically advantageous to yourself, factoring in how other countries are likely to behave, and then also factoring in the climate
yeah,
resilience, because even if we do it, if you believe climate change is going to happen and it's going to be so catastrophic, then being resilient to it is actually more important than stopping the impact
yes.
that we are having or pressure in other countries. So if you're going to do it
Well,
on Greta
you can't
Thunberg's,
stop it. You
if
can't
you, yeah,
stop it. Yeah,
or looking
precisely.
at ways to
You
reverse the
can't, like,
impact of
climate
what we've
change.
already done. There's so many other angles you can go down if you really do
Like,
buy into it. That's not what we are actually doing.
100%. But the fact, when you actually look into the history of it, you know, when you're talking about, initially, like, it was actually the conversation last night, because he was an older gentleman. He was like, well, it was always global warming when I was younger, but now because it's not getting warmer, it's now changed to climate change. And it, obviously, anybody can see that sort of subtle shift, and it becomes then, in essence, what I look at is it's a money making exercise. Um, and that transparency from people, scrapping net zero, which I think is a necessarily a good thing, um, because it's not being done in the correct manner. It's just being done blindly. Scrapping that net zero is probably one of the best policies, in my opinion,
Yeah.
for reform have. Um, because you just, like I said, pissing into the wind, pissing money away on a foolhardy thing that isn't going to work. Even if you pull it off what you're talking about, it
Yeah.
isn't going to
And we're
be
not
able to be
against doing
implemented.
things with renewable technologies. I'm looking at modelling the battery energy storage for some of the sites. So not putting it on a
Hmm.
field and turning a field next to somebody's house and
Yeah.
smiling a lovely view with a load of batteries. It's putting it in a cage on a car park round the corner where no one will see, next to a building that's using that the
Yeah.
energy from the battery. If you
The
look at some
energy.
of the
Yeah.
returns on investment for that, they're very healthy. They're better than solar panels generally. So it's
Yeah.
something that,
Well, I've never
well,
understood the solar panel
on
thing,
very crude
especially in
averages.
this
It's like
country.
8 year return on investment on getting solar panels. Batteries, like you're
Yes.
looking at 3 to 5, and then but the lifespan's like
Yeah.
15 years, so you're in profit the rest of the years. If you've got generation and storage, then it's even better. And there's
Hmm.
loads of different emerging markets for it if you give flexibility to the grid. So if at peak, most of the energy costs are at peak times of usage. So if you can take yourself off grid and use your stored energy at peak times, you're getting rid of a lot of that cost. So there's
Yeah.
loads of different factors to it,
Which
but we're looking into all this stuff, which is with
and then it
renewable
comes back
technology.
to
So we're doing more than the people who've been shouting and screaming about renewable energy and net
yeah.
zero. It's like you you make the noise about it and you set these ridiculous policies, but then if you look at what actually practically works economically and does
It
actually
doesn't.
benefit that as
Yeah. Yeah.
well, then we're the ones doing it. But we just want to scrap the ridiculous targets. But that sums it up. It's like Lancaster Council hasn't really got
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
much big investment into this. They've got a load of policies which sound good. Yeah,
Well, it's the red tape. It's the red tape as well, in terms of the fact that I know one of, well, I don't know whether he's still alive. I haven't seen him for a long time, but he owned a farm up over Baxenden Way. A guy called Jim, who was a old stone waller, and he had very little teeth. He was really sound guy, and he put up his a homemade wind turbine, and the council had such a battle with him and he ended up not taking it down, but they wanted him to take it down. And it's like, well, surely that should be a good, because he hasn't got the right permits and he hasn't got, well, no, what it needs is somebody from the council to go to check it safe, sign it off, and if it is safe and it's good, leave him to it, instead of trying to force, you on one hand you're saying renewable energy, clean energy and net zero, and then on the other hand you're telling people to take down renewable energy sources, which it doesn't, it's that paradoxical, which is why I think people become so
yeah. And the
disillusioned with it.
state at every level
um
of government are like far too involved in what everybody's doing. And it's got to the point where there's that many
mhm.
rules and things, but there's no teeth to actually prosecuting them. That you don't get the
Yep.
law stuck to. Like, look at shoplifting is a perfect example. You've got that Zach
Yeah.
Polanski guy saying basically, he said something like if he was poor he'd shoplift, uh, and it's perfectly justifiable, and it's like the big war on the corporations thing, and the poor should be able to just basically be lawless and go and steal, yeah, which
Do
just
what they
puts the
want.
cost on everybody
Yeah.
else rather than the corporations anyway. But then if you actually want law and order, you need simple rules that are actually targeting what you really need to target it, and some serious consequences
Yeah.
to not following them. So it's hard with planning stuff because, like, on the one hand, I'm all for like people's freedom and the very traditional thing of if you have some land, then you should be able to do what you want. But
You could
then
do
if
what,
it's
yeah,
impacting upon somebody else, then that is the line for me. Like live and let
that's
live.
where it
Same with anything
changes.
personal. Like as soon as you start impacting on
100%.
somebody else in an unreasonable
100%.
way, which the majority of people would think is unreasonable, that's when you've got contention
Yes.
and where you need to start intervening. He was probably
And
not causing anyone any bother. It was just someone putting a frivolous complaint because
no.
he probably paid him off once.
Well, this is the thing. The farm next. This is it. The farm next door had a wind turbine that they had a license for, so it wasn't even sort of out of the ordinary for the area. You could see the other wind turbine from where he was, and I think that's the thing with, like, you hit the nail on the head in terms of a council or a government's responsibility is, if your behavior impacts on society or another, that's where a council or government should step in and go, hang on a minute, this is where you stop, rather than pre preempt. It's almost like pre-crime and stopping them doing
Yeah,
something because
this
it
just comes
might
back to
do
the whole
this.
social engineering stuff as well. It's like, what role do you want the
Hundred
government to
percent.
have? Do you want them to be manipulating society into some sort of vision that they see as how it should be?
Yeah.
And like, you can, there's always got to be an element of that because, like, with a tax system, for example, it's like you're incentivizing the right behaviors to grow the economy, and you've got to do a bit of that. But then, like, socially,
Yes.
I'm very much like, don't intervene. And like with that example that you said, it's just like
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
not have known he needed the permit, or he might have just deliberately
No.
thought, "Oh, bugger him, no one's going to say anything," and I've been caught out.
Well. No, knowing Jim, he probably thought,
Well,
"Fuck him."
in
Knowing Jim,
which
that's probably
case,
what he
a
thought.
common sense approach would say, "Come and check it's all right. If it's all right, make him pay for the permit." Maybe with a little fine on top of it
And
to
done.
say, naughty boy, you should have got this in the first place. And then if
Yes.
he's resistant to it, then you need to um, go perhaps a more punitive route to say, we've been perfectly reasonable with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think most people, minus the odd egg, most people would be receptive to stuff like that. People just want to be treated fairly, and I think that's where the issue lies. But to be honest, as it stands right now, it's a very
Yeah.
bleak
The amount
landscape,
of planning issues
in
I
my
get
opinion.
people, and the Blanchard Council, well, apart from where highways is related, or major projects, we have flooding. We've got nothing to do with planning really. It's Burnley Borough Council, and I've had like one guy I went to see wants to extend his house. It used to be three terrace houses in a row years ago, and they knocked the end one down and converted
Hmm.
the other two into one. And he wants to rebuild the end one. So it's three converted into one. Nobody can see it.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
lives in the middle of nowhere. There's only one neighbour anywhere near who has no problem with it whatsoever. He's got like a massive farm type house, the next door neighbour. They've got like land at the back with horses on. Lovely, lovely place. But nobody can even see
yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah.
Nobody's complaining or anything. And it's just the planning rules saying it needs to be subservient to the original dwelling meant that the original application was declined because they didn't have the power to even approve it, to
And
be fair to
yeah,
them. Because they, yeah, and it's just
which is
rules for
just
rules' sake, where it's like if you just go out and look at the property, you should have the license. Just
yes,
go, you know what? That nobody could see it. That's fine. You should have the autonomy to
no,
go and make that
just crack
judgment
on,
call. And if someone then challenges it and says, no,
100%.
actually, you're impacting 30 people here,
Then yeah, even the person that's building it would
yeah.
be like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize." Right, okay, well, I'll change it.
And they have
Does
the
this work if
opportunity
I
to
do it
object
this
when they
way?
apply to plan permission and
And
no one objected. So if nobody's objecting, unless there's some sort of backhander going on or
then there you
something that
go.
raises
Yeah,
a complaint, then you should just be able to step in and go, you know what he was planning on doing would have massively increased the value. He'd moved around to this area
yeah, yeah.
relatively recently. So it's like someone's coming buying a nice property in your area to spend the money in your
Hmm.
area and wants to make a property even nicer in your
Yeah,
area. And
and
yeah, or they should
you're
at least
penalising
help you
them,
to say,
and
this is how we go about it. This is what the rules say. Our hands are tied. This is
yes,
what you can and can't do.
that sort of hand holding sort of element through it, which is very very lacking within that realm, and it kind of brings me on to probably the next point in because I know you mentioned you wanted to talk about the sort of HMO element, and especially in Burnley, I understand why. Um, what's your stance with sort of HMOs? Because obviously you mentioned property values and obviously getting the right licenses and permissions. From my understanding, HMOs, if it's 5 bedrooms or over, you need a license. If it's 4 or under,
If
you don't.
Article
Is that
4
correct
is
still?
in place, then you need to go through the planning process. If there's no Article 4 in place, the thresholds are
Right.
a lot higher. And even if Article 4 is in place with smaller properties, you can still do it. So,
So
uh,
what's Article 4 then?
So it's a piece of legislation that lets local councils say in certain areas they want to enact it, we can make the five or more HMOs definitely have to apply for planning permission.
Right. Is
Whereas
that
if you
in
don't,
certain
if
areas?
well, in Burnley we've enacted it in certain areas. In other districts they've said for every area. It
Right.
just gives more powers. Whereas for the smaller HMOs, you can, even if Article 4 is in place, you don't need planning permission. You can just
Got
turn
you.
it into a HMO. If there's five or more bedrooms and Article 4 is in place, you can you have to go through the planning process.
Yeah, yeah.
If no Article 4 in place, I think the threshold's a lot higher, is my understanding of it. So it
Right.
just basically gives local councils a bit more power to know. Because you don't necessarily, if you don't have to tell the council, they don't even know where the HMOs are.
Right.
And where it impacts with HMOs necessarily aren't the problem, just like a
Mm,
hotel isn't the problem.
I agree.
It's filling it with asylum seekers in people's neighbourhood, which are coming over here on boats and no one has a clue who they are or what the background is in large numbers at great expense to the state, whilst there's cost of living crises and everything else is a mess. That's what's winding people up. But the
Well,
HMO is like, if you split up with your partner or something, or you're a young professional just finished uni and you can't afford or don't want to spend the money on your own house to save up to buy one, should be a great thing, but it's just been
yes.
ruined by.
Well, that's the thing. I think, obviously, in terms of, I'm very well aware that vulnerable young adults that can't afford 800-900 quid a month rent plus your bills on top of that and your food and so on and so forth, it's just unviable. But 90 quid a week for bills included for a room in a HMO, they can afford. Um, so I think, they are a very much a necessity, because I think if they weren't there, there'd be a hell of a lot more homeless people on the streets. Now, I completely understand the point in terms of people in communities, and I know in our locality there's been a couple of HMOs that are close to schools that people have raised concerns about, in terms of asylum seekers, which I completely understand. The thing for me, and this comes back to, I don't know whether I mentioned it before, about the XL bully sort of situation, is banning the dog when it's not the dog, it's the actual owner. That's the problem. The thing with the HMOs, and the reason why I believe there's been such a massive incline in them in the past, 5 to 10 years, is the UK's property buying laws. you know, I can't go and buy a house in America. I can't do it without, going through a very, very, very lengthy legal process. And
Yeah,
even then, I can't live there 100% of the time. It's got to be 90 days, and that's it. Vice versa in Spain, vice versa anywhere. I can't just go and buy willy nilly. Whereas in this country, I know from first-hand perspective the amount of money that has come into Manchester through Hong Kong is it's unbelievable. So, for instance, you take Eccles, it was not a massively affluent area. It was a good area to move into because it was relatively close to Manchester and Trafford Centre for work, but houses were relatively cheap. You could pick up a terraced house, 70, 80 grand, there or thereabouts, which is grand. That, I know for a fact, some of them houses that were bought for 70 odd grand were sold for 170 grand less than a decade later, because the amount of investment that has come from overseas. Because ultimately, like, you look at London is now over 50% owned by foreign investment firms, or foreign nationals. That, to me, has done nothing but drive property prices to the heights that they are, which ultimately drives people that reside and live here out of the market into the rental market, which then creates a supply and demand issue, and then ultimately they can't afford the rents. I mean, I've seen a cottage the other day, which is not far from me, and it was like 1,400 quid a month rent. It's a 2-bedroom cottage, terraced, and I'm
that's not
thinking,
mentioning like the energy costs, which for most cottages are older, inefficient buildings, and
it's
yeah,
bonkers. And that's the thing for me, is the fact that I completely understand the whole issue with HMOs and illegal immigrants and asylum seekers, or whatever the term or label that you want to put on them. but they are a massive necessity considering that the actual cause of them is the UK property laws.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's the symptom and
Yeah.
not the disease. But the problem is, unless you're in national power to stop the influx of asylum seekers and refugees, and then also address the wider problems in the immigration system, which many of the people in it's at least some of those categories are going into HMOs. You can only use the powers that you've got locally.
Yes.
In lower tier local government, which is Burnley Borough Council, or upper tier local government, Lancashire County Council, unless you have a unitary authority that does both. So they're the powers that you've got, and
And
you
you
can
can't
also,
change national. Yeah, well,
yeah,
you can
and
make
a
it
lot,
known, but you can't change national sort of property policy.
yeah, and how it works with the asylum seekers, the you've got multiple organisations, so the Home Office are responsible for them, and
Hmm.
same with the refugees. But there's multiple different points of entry. So if you're turning up on a boat in Dover, arriving at the beach and immediately declaring yourself, you'll then get moved to somewhere in the country, be it a hotel or straight into or one of the former military barracks that they're using,
Hmm.
or straight into a house or a HMO or some of the
Hmm.
other forms of temporary like prefab accommodation that they're using. They then will pay an organisation or a council to deliver services to integrate that person to an extent. And all the different schemes work slightly differently, and they get English as a second language lessons. If they've got kids, the kids go to school and all that sort of thing. And asylum seekers and refugees get different amounts and
Yeah,
not
yeah,
different
yeah,
within all the refugee schemes. So I think like the Ukrainians, you get 200 quid when you turn up. So it's like Monopoly, 200 quid for passing go sort of thing. And they're like all the schemes work slightly differently. I know like over half of the Afghans in Lancashire have special educational, like the kids have special educational needs. So that's putting a big burden on the special needs already problem around here.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there's all different factors to it. And then when they get moved into areas, be it immediately or 6 or 9 months down the line when they're moving out of a hotel, they're trying to now encourage them to now rent privately, but a lot of the time they'll just do it on their behalf. So then you've either got a council or organisations like Serco or
Hmm.
MEAS or the Salvation Army or around here Calico
Yeah, yeah.
or what housing association will rent a house, and if it's Serco, they rent it out for 5 years with guaranteed repairs and maintenance, guaranteed rent. So if they're going to fix the house, it doesn't matter what happens to the house because they're going to pay to fix it, and they're a massive company, so it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as good as a guarantee you can get. Um, and then a council doesn't necessarily know when this happens. Other councils also house asylum seekers in Burnley, so they'll take the asylum seeker from the government, but then because to provide housing for them that they legally have to do, because they've accepted them and take the money for them, they'll then put them in Burnley and
Right.
not tell us,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and find out when they present themselves somewhere. So then
Ah, okay.
some councils don't do that with each other because it's like if I'll do it to you, you'll do it to me, and then
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
they've got too much demand and don't really care what another council thinks of them. So it's like there's no mandatory sharing of this data of where they are or anything with organisations like the
Which
police.
which is
With the fire and
crazy.
rescue service in Lancashire, we worked out just under 1 in 10 HMOs in the last few years had a fire related incident.
Mm.
So you talk about a lot of people who like aren't necessarily well versed in using appliances and electricity and interacting with it as we do over here.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
might have behavioural issues or mental health issues, um, and it's causing a lot. But the organisations don't know, councils don't even
Which is
necessarily.
it's really strange. Like that sort of. Um, I remember when I was watching a documentary on as I go down the rabbit holes of an evening and then end up going to sleep at like 3 a.m. and being tired for the remainder of the week. I think it was something. It was something regarding 9/11 and the World Trade Center and how the interagencies within the states, i.e., the CIA, the FBI, and it wasn't DA, was it the NIA? They kind of all knew different snippets of the information and story, but didn't want to share it with each other because they wanted to be the one that sort of found out, cracked the case, so to speak. They wanted to be seen as the glory, or they were glory chasing. And I wouldn't have ever thought that in local councils, whether it be Lancashire County Council, Yorkshire Council, whatever it may be, there would be that sort of curtain that there's no sort of communication of like, oh well, we're going to put them there because that's not our sort of constituency, that's somewhere else, and we don't want them in ours, but we've done our bit from a national governmental level. It's quite surprising to find that out.
Yeah, it's scandalous. But the whole thing is scandalous
Yeah,
because
well, yeah, it's scandalous from top to bottom.
yeah, because people have pushed back against the hotels, the government wanted to be seen to clamp down on the hotels.
Mm.
So they started putting them in HMOs because they're cheaper than renting a lot of houses. But ultimately, the, they're kind of better off in a hotel if they're in a HMO because they're
But
less dispersed. If they present behavioural problems
yeah,
and have issues, so the one next to the school you mentioned, um, that incident came to my attention, and it happened every time there's an incident. Someone will tell me about it because they think, why isn't anybody doing anything? Only
yeah,
the
yeah.
folk look into it and take it seriously and do something, and they're the only people I trust with it. So there was a man allegedly doing a Nazi salute and verbally abusing
I saw that one. Yeah,
children and women outside a school. So his HMO's right next to a school, and he's behaving like that, and people felt intimidated. There were people's kids crying. The school have had multiple issues with other residents in the past. I got sent a video of another one of the residents who apparently at 4 o'clock every morning is outside shouting to himself in the street. There's no one there. It's just like having a
yeah,
shouting
yeah,
with nobody. All sorts of issues. Apparently, a lot of them are on tag already when they turn up. The police typically, if they arrest them for something, they just bail them and then move them somewhere else. Or if there's antisocial behaviour, there was some in Padiham a few months ago who were like having a massive street party, just putting deck chairs in the middle of a road. They looked African and they were just there like having a lot of problems. They were apparently threatening to stab the police when the police turned up, and the police just left and then went back the next day. They were getting into arguments with the neighbours, and people didn't want to let the kids play out. Then every time one of these things happen, more people contact me, about more of them, and
yeah.
say they might not have been aware of me, if you know what I mean, or see the comments and stuff. And then they say, "Oh, I've had this incident. Oh, my friend, you should speak to this person." And it's like, "Oh, I was sexually assaulted. The police said there's not much they can do. It's the HMO near my house. I have to see the guy every day, and it is like trying to grab my bum and saying horrible things to me and trying to break into my daughter's house." And it's like I'm hearing all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like people aren't making it up.
No,
But some of these rumours when it's like, oh, there's an asylum hotel there, and it's like, is it or isn't it? Or there could
and
be like a lot of confusion over it.
these stories that sort of come out. Obviously, I saw the one about the Nazi salute that you mentioned, and it doesn't surprise me that in HMOs, because a lot of the time it is vulnerable people, whether they be asylum seekers or whether they be English natives. That wouldn't surprise me if that happened, regardless of color of skin or asylum seeker or whatever. I think the thing for me is the fact that and looking at it purely from a humanity aspect. And we mentioned right at the beginning of this conversation that we as a a country kind of contributed to the fucking up of Syria and Afghanistan and so on and so forth. But these incidents that are happening are abhorrent, they're wrong, they shouldn't be happening in this country, especially when we technically, as a population, as a country, are doing something which is virtuous by taking these people in as asylum seekers or refugees. The concern for me is the fact that are we out of say 100 asylum seekers and refugees, say there's five bad ones, and the five bad ones do something awful, whether that be something innocuous as having a street party, like you said, and threatening violence, or whether that be something like that happens in Southport or London or whatever it may be. One incident like that is enough to make you stop, question, and wonder, right, what's wrong with this process? Why are these incidents happening, however rare or however common they are? Why? Because not every single refugee or asylum seeker that comes over is going to be a bad person. We
No, of
all know
course
that.
not.
We
So,
all
so
know that.
yeah, I think
It's
why it, again, it's like it's a very nuanced thing, which is
yes,
why there's all this contentiousness about it, and fundamentally, there's loads of factors. If these people have been in a war zone, they could have serious mental health issues. They could have inherited or born with serious issues.
yeah, yeah.
Could have had any form of other trauma in their life. They could have had trauma on the journey over here through multiple
Which
safe
which is
countries to get here, but some of the
highly
unsafe
likely.
ones they might cross through, or
Yep,
even the safe ones, something could have happened. It might be adaptation problems. They might have fundamentally views that are completely incompatible. Let's face it, some of these people are coming from countries in the world where
you
they've never
couldn't
seen
imagine. Yeah,
they've never seen women's bodies before, and they
true.
come here start seeing women's bodies, and you're talking like a young man here on his own, and he's never seen anything like that, and
Yeah,
they might not have had internet access, and suddenly he's got
true.
unfettered access to pornography on the like. There's loads of different things it could be.
Yeah,
Um, if you look at some of the cultures in other countries and how they treat women, particularly, or how they live in terms of like how the poor people live, and they might never have had a job in their life. So the idea of working for a living, doing a job that we just see as normal, is completely foreign
yeah,
because they've had a very different life. They might have been a pickpocket or something like that
yeah.
and decided to embark upon it. We have no idea who these people are. They could be really terrible criminals, or they could have been a reasonably well educated working person who's been
Yeah,
unfortunately caught up in a war that we should have never been involved in a country that we've affected. And like, you've got a lot more sympathy for that person than any of the other ones.
100%.
So
And I
many
think
different
I
things.
think that's it. I think that's the problem is the fact that that's the one of my old friends. He said he was an Apache engineer, and he said they used to use or something that they called the Swiss cheese effect, which would or the Swiss cheese method, which would basically mean if one engineer misses one thing, which is would be a hole in the Swiss cheese, it wouldn't get through the next hole because there's another slice of Swiss cheese in there that there's no hole in at that part. And I think there's something like that that needs to be put in place that if these asylum seekers and refugees are coming over, then, I don't know it's sort of tongue in cheek to say, but it reminded me of a 90s film, which was Ali G in the house, where he was saying, we let all the fit ones in and we keep all the mingers out. It's really funny, but tongue in cheek, it's the fact of, like you said, finding out the backgrounds of these people. Who are you? What are you? Are you a carpenter? Yes, I'm a carpenter. Right, you can come in. We'll help you. We'll make sure that you're
Yeah.
safe and blah blah
Problem
blah.
is, you can't necessarily trust them. There's just been that
Yeah,
story in
exactly.
Afghanistan of people, the Taliban charge people to give them a fake death warning, like
Right.
you're on the hit list, sort of thing, so they can come over here and so the Taliban are just laughing at us, thinking we can
Yeah.
charge money. That's fundamental. We're such a laughing stock with all these things, whether it's care visas, work visas. There's so much abuse because our systems are so weak
Mm.
that, and because of the state of the country, and frankly, like if you could help everybody in the world, most people would like to do so. If there was
Yes,
infinite resources and we just happened to have control of them, and it's like you could just click your fingers and help everybody in the world.
you would do.
But there's so
Yeah.
many million starving children and people in conflict and all these sort of things.
Well, there's 6 million
But
currently in, is it Yemen, that are starving, and I know everybody's, don't get me wrong, this is not to slight on Palestine and Israel. So before anybody starts,
yeah,
but
60,
there's
70,000 Palestinians dead.
yeah, but there's 6 million kids starving at the
Yeah,
minute. And then there's 70,000 Christians being butchered and murdered in Nigeria. It's like, you know, at what point
disproportionate levels of attention. Yeah.
precisely? And that brings us sort of full circle to the media's role to play in it. Um, but yeah, I mean, you know, I could speak to you all evening, and we could go through everything in much greater detail. And I'd love to have you back on next year at some point and see where the landscape lies at that point, and we can discuss what progress is made, and maybe fingers crossed that £350 million hole has been somewhat recovered. But I'll keep an eye on the
Just have a
stock
look at the
market.
bond markets. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Thanks for
massively
having me.
appreciate. Oh, I massively appreciate it, Tom, and yeah, I look forward to keeping in touch, and yeah, we'll get you back on in the new year. But thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, it's nice to do it in open, just have an open chat as well,
Yeah.
with no structure or script to it, and just see where the conversation leads. It's refreshing compared to formulaic scripted
Well,
media appearances.
it's like I said, I started this purely out of frustration and sort of the mantra of put up or shut up. And I'm not in it to get sound bites. I'm not in it to get, sort of catch anybody out. It's literally one working person's view from Lancashire. This is the way I see the world. And I kind of want to sort of explore everything that's sort of important to me, and that interests me. And at the minute, I can't I can't fucking escape politics. It's just it's it's so important to everybody, and I will end sort of this conversation with the fact that digital ID is very much for me the hill that you have to die on. You We cannot allow this to be implemented based on the fact that if we do, and it's not, if we do let it in, I don't think it will ever be taken out.
Yeah.
And that's the
Can I
danger.
swear?
Of course you can.
Fuck digital ID.
Good lad, Tom.
That's the what, your PG-13 now.
Oh no, we go for it. Don't worry, R rated, doesn't matter. But massively appreciate it, brother, and look forward to having you back on in the new year.
Look forward to it anytime.